that Yuna was getting emotional, scolding the redhead who fought her with gritted teeth. The shadow easily knocked the smaller girl aside with her shield, telling her that her emotions made all of her weak moves obvious. If she could not overcome this, then she'd never defeat a single foe. To make things worse, the redhead was trying to copy her sister's flow. These personal words hurt the redhead deeply, and the shadow continued to mock her, even making fun of her for crying. Another figure manifested in her vision, and the redhead saw her sister standing before her. However, instead of appearing to help, her sister then put her sword to the paladin's neck. Harsh words fell from her sister's lips, telling Yunha to just die so that she'd stop embarrassing her family. The redhead was insulted and yelled, her confidence refusing to accept such an accusation. She asked what more these ghosts wanted from her when she had only done her best. Obviously, they wanted to strip her of body, soul, and sanity, but they could not tell her that. No, instead, these monsters goaded her, calling her childish and saying that her best would always amount to nothing if she did not accomplish anything. They were sure that she already knew that. That was why she ran off to join the military. It was emotional damage after emotional damage, and her sister's shadow ghost was serving it hot, with spices that pierced deep into the paladin's heart. This somehow made the shadow sister more enraged, yelling that she'd told the redhead to stop showing her emotions. It looked like Yunha was on the verge of giving up. Junmo also faced an enemy that was fine with wreaking havoc on the world. The soldier tried to stop his doppelganger from hurting more people, grabbing the man and trying to force him to stop, but the creature hissed at him, yelling to let go. The poor corporal was tossed aside by the beast, who growled that he would show all of these bullies who the loser was. The angry version yelled that the corporal surely wanted to show the bullies their place as well. For years they had bullied them without remorse. Surely they could not let such a thing go so easily. Even Jamo had to admit that he did, in fact, want to show all those people who'd once called him weak. The corporal sparked and crackled with electrical fire, buzzing around him. The boy so badly wanted to be accepted, but not in this horrible and violent way. He raised his weapon against the shadow version of himself, and the shadow version glared at the corporal's stubbornness. This was so annoying to the shadow corporal, and he yelled that his twin was an idiot after all, an absolute weak idiot. However, Junmo did not care what he was called. Their electric hammers met each other in the middle, and sparks flew as they fought. The shadow yelled that the brunette would just continue being a loser if he acted like this, and he would be a nobody forever. However, that was perfectly fine with the young lad. His trusted sergeant Lee Hyunwook had told him to wait. He was not above or below waiting. Now was not the time. Still, the shadow grinned wickedly, still trying to rage bait as he asked the corporal to be honest. The wicked twin then smirked, saying that the person that the corporal hated most of all was definitely Lee Hyunwook. Suddenly, the jerk turned into Junmo's boss, switching names and faces. Hyunwook sure had a convincing devil face. The shadow demon did not even have to try that hard to look evil as he mocked the young soldier for looking up to a man who hid the way for him to grow and only told him when he needed him. The young lad had risked his life to awaken, yet his sergeant had told him to hide it. That was definitely unfair. Still, Junmo protested, saying that he felt no bitterness towards his sergeant. The sergeant insisted that he was hated, and that the corporal had to live as an F rank just like his sergeant. But his sergeant was always one step ahead. The battle raged on, and the young coral fought hard to defend himself from the same stuff that the paladin was trying to defend herself from. Neither of them understood the opponent that they fought, and neither of them knew that they were hurting each other. The clash was deadly, light sparking with feathers around it as electricity danced through the sky. The two were so strong that they somehow managed to keep up with each other, Junmo screaming a war cry while Envy continued to watch in satisfaction. The redhead was confused, frustrated, and tired, still she fought, and Envy grinned to watch them struggle. She had really manifested on Earth just to make the humans put on a fun show for her. Low-effort queen that she was, because the heroes were really doing all the work for her, and they charged at each other again. They yelled and screamed and ran at each other. Suddenly a voice remarked on the demon of envy, and he had really poor taste. This surprised the pink-haired demon, and she looked down to see that she'd missed one hero. Yes, she had completely forgotten about Choi Youngjun, and he glared at her from where he stood. It seemed that he had also been wrapped in an illusion, his eyes glowing pink, and they were wide from whatever it was that he could see. The man had found himself catapulted back to the darkest memory of his life, where people cheered and praised him for saving the day. The soldiers around him cheered for the bespectacled ginger who had once again defeated a monster. They called him a national treasure. If it had not been for him, they would have failed this raid, and he had contributed to most of the raid's success. The soldiers were sure that even A, ranked of great levels, could not achieve this much, and they thought that their boss was a superstar. They even called him the strongest among them. However, there was one internal voice that thought that Sergeant Choi was nothing but an idiot. It was not just one, it was many, and deep down inside. The soldiers hated how often he showed off. They looked at his expression and felt like it pissed them off just looking at him. They even thought that he was scary, almost sure that someone like him would definitely become a villain. One by one, their words were like knives scratching his senses and clawing through his heart. Beside him, his shadow self goaded that this was what people really thought of him despite the praise. Sergeant Choi could hear them just fine, and he turned to his shadow self, asking what was new about envy or jealousy. In fact, the shadow self pissed him off even more for having the same face as him. That was something the bespectacled ginger could not stand even for a second. The shadow seemed absolutely shocked about getting attacked right away, as Choi Youngjun did not even hesitate to behead himself. With the mirror image shattered into a million pieces, the ginger found himself before the demon of envy, finding his teammates fighting amongst themselves. Whispering in his ears was something that he thought was an unforgivable sin, and the demon of envy stared curiously at this strange, lone hero. Then, the ginger raised his head, saying that no matter how he thought about it, he just could not bring himself to like something like her, and he could not let her live. Whispering in his ear with his own face was an abomination, and Envy was actually shocked to see that he really broke through her spell. She made him absolutely ick, and he leapt at her, getting angrily close as he spun fast, slicing up circles around the summon of Envy. No matter how he looked at it, she made him really uncomfortable, and he diced her up like a chef slicing onions. The demon had been caught off guard and her core was exposed, but Sergeant Choi was not focusing on that. Instead, he laughed in madness, saying that he wondered what he could cut off from her to make himself feel better. Meanwhile, inside the mirror world, the redhead still fought her sister and herself. Position, speed, strength, all of her abilities were a mere imitation, and the shadow mocked that she would never reach her sister's level. Those were harsh words, harsher than the girl could usually bear. Still, the redhead showed no mercy, attacking again and again, and she mocked her, saying that on top of all her failures, her emotions were also ruining her sword path. The redhead gritted her teeth as she fell back, indeed losing to this foe despite her best efforts. Still, she charged forward, slicing at the monster in front of her with a sharp attack that sent debris flying into the air. The fight was one of rage and violence, and the paladin had suffered great damage to her clothes and body. Still, her shadow self was unimpressed, asking Yunha if she thought that all this was enough to close the gap between her and her sister. The ghost of her sister then decided to step in, muttering that it could not even be close to enough. The older redhead then released a shot of purple magic so huge and sharp that it cut down an entire side of the stadium, bringing it down before them. The paladin had to cover her face to protect herself from the debris, but her sister still mocked her. The older redhead had no intention of putting up with this anymore. Co Yuna was to stop whining and find another way immediately. She believed that it was long past due for the girl to stop clinging to her sister's bootstraps. The redhead gritted her teeth in annoyance, staring at the pillar of a woman that she had once respected and then at the shadow version of herself that continued to mock and goad her. The negative thoughts told her that she would never catch up to her sister. The hatred within the shadow was incredible, and she yelled at the paladin to just give up already. Of course, Yuna was not about to cave to such a silly suggestion. She was supposed to give up. Perhaps that was the sensible thing to do in a battle that seemed to rage endlessly. Giving up seemed like the best option, and the charging sword pierced right through her gut, slicing her as she fell. Meanwhile, in Junmo's world, he still fought harshly against the shadow version of Lee Hunwook. The man also had to endure the shadow whispering nonsense in his ear and telling him how much he hates his sergeant. Still, the corporal stubbornly denied this accusation. The shadow mocked him, saying that the youth had a long way to go, so he was still hiding his emotions. The brunette could go ahead and keep hiding them until the right time. The brunette raised his head in surprise at this sudden vote of confidence from the creature that had been tormenting him for ages. However, it was of course a trap, and the brunette sneered, telling the boy to keep himself hidden away until he called for him again like a good dog. Those words stung. Junmo pushed to his feet, knowing that he had awakened after risking his life, and his body sparked with energy as he powered up. He finally screamed, asking how much longer he had to stay hidden away. It was too much for him to bear, and the apparition laughed, saying that the brunette had finally revealed his true self. It was just as he expected. The youth wanted to show off to others after all. Large bolts of lightning bubbled inside Junmo, and the apparition spread its arms in laughter. The brunette finally admitted that he had indeed been jealous. He wanted to be acknowledged like the sergeant, but he had always been forced to walk behind. The brunette laughed, saying losers often gave him the chills, and he laughed, adding that Junmo always acted like he didn't need what they had. However, the corporal was twisted to the core on the inside. which was what the apparition believed as he launched at the brunette who was getting all powered up. The apparition attacked, and this time the brunette took on the hit full force, his head smashed to the side from the force of the blow. The apparition was shocked by this action, cursing and wondering how this was possible. Even the redhead apparition was furious, asking the redhead why she was standing still. However, something had finally occurred to Yuna as she held on to the sword that had pierced her. She had given up already, and even her sister slowed as she watched her. The paladin raised her head and confessed that she had completely given up on the idea of becoming her sister, at the cost of losing herself. That was not the kind of life that she wanted. From now on, Yuna would be known as herself and herself alone. She would not pretend to be anyone else. The shadow looked furious, manifesting sharp and angry fangs. She screamed at the paladin for being cocky, saying that she was nothing and that there was nothing that she could accomplish. However, the redhead spoke with confidence, knowing that she would not live a life alone anymore. Now, more than anything, she had trusted allies who would give her detailed reports. She recalled listening to Lee Hunwook's plan before they set out, and she had asked if he really thought that the three of them could take down a part of the King of Hell, worried that it would be too much. However, the sergeant had looked at them with confidence, and she blinked, wondering why he stared like that. The man had asked if she was nervous or thought that they could not do it themselves. Either way, she did not need to worry. Lee Hunwook trusted his comrades. The man was sure that they would always get the job done, so the paladin, Junmo and Sergeant Choi. He hoped that all three soldiers would also firmly believe in themselves and trust his decision as well. It was such a touching and moving speech, because he was standing behind them all, believing in them without hesitation. Knowing this, the redhead could not bear to let him down. The apparition said that she had lied to herself for her whole life, but that did not matter anymore to the redhead. Even if she had lied and could not believe in herself, then she would believe in him, in the one person who had not lied to her. She was sure of it. Yunha would believe in her comrade Sergeant Lee Hunwook, and saying this with confidence and the strongest of beliefs, the glass surrounding them shattered. Even Junmo had strengthened his conviction. Even if he knew that he was just a pretentious loser in his former life, that was also the reason that he could so easily and blindly trust Lee Hunwook. The apparition yelled at the lightning boy, asking him to pick up his weapon. However, the brunette would not do that, because Sergeant Lee Hunwook trusted even someone like him. Thus, the mirror around him shattered as well. In a dark haze, Envy was losing control of the situation as she fought against the valiant Sergeant Choi. The man was frustrated about her inability to pin down the fast-moving hero who zipped around her like a fly chasing food that he desired. He moved so fast that within minutes, he was able to close the gap between them once again. The demon of envy was a giant summon, but he was fast and confident enough to slice her over and over again, though he was rather frustrated with all of her dodging. The demon hissed at him, baring her teeth as she was sliced and diced again. While he fought, the ginger demanded that she show herself again so that they could end this fight quickly. The demon hissed, baring fangs at the man in rage as more of her blood flowed from the wounds that he cut into her. The demon lashed out, finally catching the speedster with her claws, and she brought down her second hand, determined to slice the man into ribbons. However, before she could do so, her eyes widened in horror and she turned in time to see the paladin come charging right at Ezer. The ginger immediately yelled out to the platoon leader, telling her about the gemstone target at the demon's navel, for that was her core. The redhead did not need to be told twice, and she readied her holy golden sword. The paladin pushed forward with a scream of power, slicing right at the exposed naval core with brutal efficiency. She had been so focused on dealing with Sergeant Choi that envy was caught wide open, and the slash that followed sliced her core in two. However, in an almost impressive display of desperation, the panicked demon grabbed the paladin's sword. The strong fighter had already made a dent in the pink stone, but envy would not let her cut more. She refused to die this way, stopping the core from completely falling apart. This was frustrating, and the ginger called out Park Junmo, asking the brunette just what he was doing at this crucial moment. Just as he spoke, there was an answer of purple lightning that danced into the horizon, and Corporal Park Junmo appeared, swinging the power of Thor in the mighty hammer that he held. She came full force, charging at the monster that was even more wide open, with one hand occupied with the ginger and the other hand taking care of the redhead. With that much open space to work with, the lightning corporal immediately hit his goal, and the demon shrieked in pain and horror as she began to fall apart. Envy looked very upset, shrieking and crying in rage, as her core disintegrated, and so did she. The congratulations window popped up, wishing the heroes a great success at defeating Envy, one of Beelzebub's three forms and the second source of erosion. Now, part of Beelzebub's force-descended body would have to break off. The corporal screamed with joy, throwing his hands in the air to celebrate their success. The paladin was exhausted, but she also acknowledged their victory with a tired smile. It was a sight so blessed that the other soldier pointed out that he had never seen her smile before. Just then, the ginger recalled that he had forgotten to shred her for the maximum amount of pain, and they'd ended up killing her way too quickly. It was such a disappointing waste. As the three sat and recovered, the hand nearest to them disconnected from the portal and slowly began its crashing descent. Choi was still heated, though, and got in a few annoyed licks at the fallen demon while his teammates watched in amusement. There was now only one part of the core left, and Jummo wondered if Sergeant Hyunwook would be fine fighting on his own. The redhead was sure that the man would somehow pull it off. They would trust in him the same way that he had trusted in them. All that was left now was the face of Beelzebub, and the great demon did not at all like seeing the fall of the body that it had worked so hard to sneak into the human world. Now, all that was left was the demon of gluttony that almost looked bored, quite different from its cheerful appearance. The demon was disappointed by the fall of envy and pride, and it watched curiously as a portal emerged midair. Gluttony turned to study this portal, in time to see a pair of legs pop right out of it, quickly followed by a very familiar-looking bluenet. The demon was curious as it studied the appearance of Lee Han-wook in its life, and the bluenet called that all units of AMT should open the warp. With that, multiple portals opened all around the demon of gluttony, so many that the demon was quite alarmed. Then the hero called out for steel rain, and the bombardment preparations were now complete. Meanwhile, at other parts of town, orders were given out to quickly identify casualties and to move them to the rear. Anyone who could still fight was ordered to move forward. The soldiers called out to the commander, who directed them, saying that they could not last long in their current state, worrying if they could really trust that one F-rank soldier to handle the most important job of all. The commander immediately responded that the only reason that they had survived the Sil wave was thanks to that one man's tactics. Still, the soldier worried that they lacked men to deal with a threat of that scale. However, the commander responded that this was exactly why he trusted Hyunwook. The sergeant always found a way to bring the best out of a small number of men. The commander and the entire army had bet the future of Seoul on Sergeant Lee Han-wook, and they were all quite sure that they'd be cashing out on that bet in gold. The Sergeant Tin question hovered above the multiple open gates, confronting Beelzebub's final form, and he called for the descent of steel rain. Just as named, out of those portals came a hurricane of steel weapons descending from above. Gluttony watched the approach of these weapons with a bored expression on his face as expected for Beelzebub's last standing form. The rain came down on the demon that had manifested in the form of a child, and multiple parts of the King of Hell were pierced through by these razor-sharp instruments. The demon looked annoyed that these puny humans would dare attempt to injure him when he was seated quite close. It was an eyesore to him. Still, steel rained down from above, leaving heavy bruises all over the King of Hell. The onslaught of steel was relentless as all AMT forces contributed to supply their sergeant with as many arms as he would need. The lieutenant cursed as he kept the portals open, unable to believe that Hyunwook was really using an entire armory's worth of weapons in one attack. Kim Se-hee was pretty relaxed in her trust of the captain's abilities, so she was mostly unbothered by the whole thing. Still, the lieutenant worried, wondering just what on earth Hyunwook was doing. The sergeant did not even account for distance, and it looked like he was just wasting it all. The bluenet stood tall and confident, screaming as he directed every piece of steel into the monster's flesh, making sure that it was pierced, injured, and hurt. The soldier frowned in concentration as he made each shot, and Gluttony suddenly disembarked, detaching itself from the home base. The little demon shot forward like a tiny blonde bullet, its core located at the center of its head, a very dangerous and obvious position. The tiny demon flew straight at our guy, sliding off a platform of ice, and it stretched out its hand, a frown on its face like he was saying that he would not let the heroes win against him so easily. As soon as the little demon came close enough, Hyunwook slipped into a portal to escape, and the tiny blonde thing threw a furious childish rage at its prey escaping. The lieutenant was shocked to see the hero retreat so quickly. He'd thought for sure that Hyunwook would at least try to damage the little demon a bit. They would not win if they kept failing to hit it after all. The blonde seemed to think the same, and it charged up a magical attack in its eyes, a determined look on its face. The soldiers were alarmed to see that their enemy was making a move, and the amp drone squad was alerted at once. They had to disperse to their designated locations immediately. The soldiers immediately dispersed to their designated locations, and the blue demon fired a brilliant bolt that shot power into what seemed to be empty space. That shot went far and long, causing a particular area to explode into nothing. Gluttony had a deadly attack power, almost similar to a nuclear weapon, it seemed. The people were shocked to see that the last demon was definitely much more powerful than any of the others that they had faced, and Junmo worried that they should hurry to go assist the sergeant. However, The paladin did not forget that said sergeant had told them to stay out of that fight no matter what. If they joined, they would only distract the hero. Besides, she was sure that the hero had come up with a plan to take that guy down. The angry demon of gluttony still threw its tantrum in annoyance, seeking out its target that had run away. Suddenly, the hero returned, popping out of another portal as he sent forth the dark hand of the Cloud Master. The lance that he shot flew forward and true, targeting the little goblin. However, Gluttony saw the attack coming and just managed to move out of the way quickly before he got hit. Then, Hyunwook called out to Armories 3 and 4 to reload their weapons. Armory 3 and 4 instantly got to work, soldiers running ahead to comply. All weapons were reloaded, and both armories stood on standby, waiting for further instructions as they replied that the second bombardment was ready. Blue lightning arched through the air as the Cloudmaster stayed on Gluttony's tail, chasing that demon through the streets. The little thing screamed in rage and tried to counter it with his own powers, slamming the lance away and then flying up to claim the life of his target, Hyunwook. The hero saw the tiny demon coming and with gritted teeth, he ordered the release of his Mowgli blade. The blade appeared just in time, acting as a powerful shield between the human and the demon. It deflected Gluttony's attack, and the blonde child became even more furious at the course of events. In anger, the blonde doubled his power, knocking that sword aside in fury as he hungered to claim the blood of his enemy. However, Hyunwook was able to keep the Mowgli shard standing tall, so the blonde pushed even harder. He wanted so badly to get his hands on Hyunwook, growling and snarling as the human somehow managed to withstand the attack. Then, the Bluenet called out to the platoon leader. The hero's location was verified, and they were ordered to push the drone as close to him as possible. He did exactly that, and it turned out that she was not messing around with a phone, but was in fact piloting a drone. The drone flew forward speedily with the escape portal, but the blonde must have seen that his prey was about to get away because he blew away with a blade with one forceful blow and was on top of our guy in seconds. It turned out Gluttony could really hold a grudge, and that small child, like hand wrapped around the sergeant's throat with intended malice and hate. Things were not going as planned as the Mowgli shard fell to the floor, and the blonde shoved the hero through buildings, shattering them as they passed through. Quickly, Hyunwook activated hardening to stop from sustaining further damage and getting a concussion during one of the most important battles of their lives. The hero was able to control the damage with hardening, and Gluttony did not like that at all. It seemed the little boy was a glutton for causing pain and suffering because it did not let go, until it saw a blue crackle in the distance. The Mowgli shard had risen once again and was returning at full speed, heading straight for the blonde. The weapon landed, crashing into buildings and scattering dust everywhere, but not even the presence of that weapon had been enough to make Gluttony let go. Whatever the reason, the blonde had beef enough to blast a hole through the walls and send them crashing through every last one of them. It seemed determined to undo Hyunwook's hardening, and when that did not work, Gluttony did not let go until the hero stopped moving. Then the tiny demon hovered over the fallen soldier, staring at the hero with a sick and sadistic grin on its face that tore its face in almost complete halves. The other soldiers called out in concern to Lee Hyunwook, worried because they had seen him go down. They begged for the sergeant to respond, and they cursed at the lunatic, worried that he was actually hurt. The maniac had really led the demon all the way to the target area, and the lieutenant cheered on for the sergeant, hoping for the Bluenet to rise. Multiple golden portal gates hovered in the sky, and the soldiers called out that they had set the bombardment point high, all zeroed in just as he had planned. All they needed now was his signal. The target had reached the target area, and this was great news to the commander. The tiger-like man yelled for all of the men to maintain a wind speed of 0.2 meters per second within 20 kilometers of the target. Then, they were to cast the wind speed spells. All soldiers fell into place, all casting wind spells at once. Wind rose in the area as expected of multiple wind spells activating at the same time, and fog rose too. Now they were all prepared, and they needed Lee Hyunwook to speak to them and give them the final order. The lieutenant called out to the man, asking him to respond. They cried again to the Bluenet, who had gone radio silent, needing him to be ready for the final phase of their plan. Suddenly, the sergeant's eyes snapped open, a grin of amusement on his face as he joked that he would surely go deaf from all of the care that they directed his way. The demon of gluttony growled in anger to see its prey open his eyes. Well, the hero just laughed and pointed at the angry little demon, and he told the creature to prepare itself, because this was going to hurt. With that, he pulled forth all the weapons from the second bombardment, and Gluttony was alarmed to see steel rain down once again. However, this steel was more potent, more powerful, and came down at a faster speed than ever, destroying everything in its wake. The fallen lance that the demon had dodged earlier also rose from the ground, and the weapon spun in the air, finding its target. Gluttony looked up just in time. the blue gem on its head glowing as it glared in anger. Hyunwook dared the little monster to try and dodge this little attack, because that entire area would be destroyed. Steel rain came down like a thunderstorm, the biggest hurricane of weapons that anyone had ever seen. From far and wide, the great sped-up rain could be viewed, and the commander watched with a hand to protect his face from the intensity of the harsh winds that brought those weapons down hard and fast. The man watched the complete decimation of the target area, soldiers nearby making a quick retreat so that they would not get caught up in the storm. The soldiers were both awed and amazed as they watched the steel rain come down, and it destroyed everything from buildings to cars to the very landscape of the area. The entire place was leveled, and after the rain came the silence that stretched a mile. The budding point of Gluttony's birth had been completely pierced, and Lee Hyunwook stared with gritted teeth to see the appearance of a particularly weird-looking tentacle-like creature. Right? The creature was called Gluttony for a reason, and it seemed its really small head had exploded into what seemed to be a gaping mouth. The commander called out for a status report, and the hero watched in horror as that tiny greedy pig swallowed all of the weapons that they had just sacrificed to kill him. It seemed there was a reason that gem was on Gluttony's head after all, so that the tiny demon could eat whatever dared to challenge him. Beelzebub's thought form was unfortunately still going strong, thanks to its weird eating habits, and the thought form had consumed all of their weapons. It was a really concerning mix. The little monster grinned in wicked satisfaction, taking great pleasure in dashing their dreams. However, Hyunwook quickly activated the Crown of Light that would rapidly boost resistance against undead property. The hero grinned just as well, asking the little demon what he was smiling about. Now he had the brat's eating patterns figured out, and he grabbed the boy's stomach, but to the demon's shock and rage. The demon would pay for its gluttony, the sergeant swore that much. There was a buzz of blue weapons coming together, and the hero could still feel the steel inside the demon. Using his abilities, the man activated Metal Smash, and the demon cried out in agony as the metal inside of its body began to smash. This was the result of eating metal without a furnace to properly digest it. All of these metals consumed within Gluttony's body burst out at once, shattering the stomach of the tiny demon as the weapons found their freedom. It was a gore-filled sight as the creature's eating habits made a mess of it, and Gluttony fell to the floor. The hero stood triumphant before his enemy, unwavering and brilliant as his weapon danced in his hand. This would make the end of the Darnsill wave. The beast Gluttony lay on the floor, delirious from pain, and the hero activated the item Sir Tristan's Failnaught. He was going to put an end to the beast once and for all. The arrow shot forward to the target that the sergeant desired, and it came closer and closer to the gem on its head, but was then swallowed by Gluttony. The creature had no intention of going on a diet even when it was near death, and the hero was mortified by the creature's sudden attack. This was why long-distance attacks sucked, and it was best to just kill the thing by getting close. Gluttony continued to grin, its mouth wide open, and the man received a warning that Gluttony was now starting to regenerate. They had put their all into bringing that little blonde a demon. They could not risk starting from scratch again. The soldiers watched in horror as all their efforts slowly went down the mud as the little rat began to reform right in front of their eyes. Gluttony laughed as it did indeed reform, and it became something much bigger than it had been before. It seemed the little blonde baby grew up into a menacing monster, and it pointed its hand at the hero, firing a shot so destructive that it raised fires from hell. Fortunately, Hyunwook dodged that attack, but the demon was not about to give up so soon as it fired attack after attack, more and more flames shooting from its fingers, its only desire to destroy and end the life of its prey. The beast then raised its attention to the drones above carrying each other portals and disabled them in a sweep of its finger lasers, bringing down any outside assistance from getting anywhere near the battlefield. One by one, the drones fell due to an intentional sabotage, and the commander yelled for all units to cease operation immediately. All the soldiers were to evacuate the area quickly because things were not looking good. The men yelled that they could not see Lee Hyunwook, and some of them wanted to go in and try and find him. They needed the man alive if they were going to strategize for the next battle. However, they suddenly heard the Mowgli release, and the giant sword manifested above the gluttonous monster. The little blonde demon had the nerve to look enraged that the hero refused to give up, but he was equally enraged, smashing the sword into the ground, annoyed that the monster dared to dodge once more. 2 of the Mowgli shards had fallen at once, and the Bluenet screamed for all units to halt and hold their positions. It was critical that they all stick to the plan, no matter how badly things looked right now. Platoon leader Lee Manhwa was asked to warp as close to the thought form as possible, which sounded like madness to the lieutenant. The hero insisted that they could not retreat at this crucial time, because there would be nothing holding Gluttony back if they left now, and the awful creature would only learn to get stronger before they could strategize. They had to hold down the ground that they had now. All of Seoul and its citizens would become this demon's food, and they could not allow that. Lee Hunwook knew what would happen. He had seen it in his past life, which was why he did not dare give up now. That monster back then, they had fought valiantly against it, soldiers standing side by side as they tried to bring down the grinning beast. However, all their efforts had been in vain, and people had died in front of his eyes. Lee Hunwook could not bear to see that happen again. They could not run, and they did not have time. The commander grits his teeth, struggling with this very difficult decision. The King of Hell's advent had been delayed because the erosion was incomplete, but they had a limited amount of time left. 36 minutes was a deadly amount of time. The commander raised his walkie-talkie and reported that all weapons were ready to use. Lee Hunwook had to make it work. This was their last shot. The hero heard the call, announcing his name and his title, and he swore to complete the mission no matter what. The man then, once again, called upon the steel rain. The rains came down, all falling as close to their target Gluttony as possible. The monster saw the rains coming down again, but it smirked since it had seen this attack before, and it knew how this story went. Once again, Gluttony opened its ugly mouth to consume any attack that dared try to hurt him, and the steel rain came down, its mouth open and ready to receive that hurricane of weapons. However, it seemed like most of the weapons were missing their mouths, and the demon was startled with confusion. See, one of the drones had flown a little closer, just as the sergeant had commanded. It came all the way down to the very center of that creature's mouth, and the drone now flew as close as possible, but the demon was sure to destroy it soon, as the noisy drone could not be hidden for long. However, that position worked just fine for the hero, and he told the soldiers to hold their ground. He would warp and dive close to it. This was the only way to take it down for sure, and Lee Hunwook ran into a nearby portal, intending to fly right into its stomach and take it out with its Zarbamba. However, the demon suddenly popped out of the portal, surprising the hero instead as it gutted the sergeant with its razor-sharp claws, laughing with evil joy as the man spat blood. The lieutenant screamed out in horror at what he saw, and the demon of gluttony stood triumphant over the fallen body of the sergeant. The monster's hands were stained with blood, and it grinned a wicked smile of victory. The commander called in for a report, desperately asking what was going on, and the lieutenant shakily reported that the cause of panic was Lee Hunwook. Their brave and fearless sergeant had fallen after his chest was pierced. All who heard the news were horrified, eyes widening in dismay and shock. The commander immediately screamed for all AMT units to fall back. If that thing had taken down Hunwook, it was just a matter of time before it took down the rest of them. A brilliant blue bird rose into the air, sailing high from the commander's location, and various other animals raced forward, including a tiger and a gorilla. The commander yelled that he would go in Hunwook's place and try to buy them some time as the troops retreated. But he needed every functional soldier out of that place immediately. There was chaos as Gluttony casually looked down at the fallen man like he just wanted to confirm that the man was dead and gone. Hunwook was still, but suddenly a huge tiger appeared before the demon sin of Gluttony. The commander had arrived at the battlefield, and as expected, Gluttony immediately opened his mouth. The demon form now faced both the tiger and the gorilla in a murderous 2-against-1 battle. The monkey roaring its anger while the tiger lashed out, leaping at the demon, which dodged the attack. Then the blonde fired off some attacks of his own, aiming to eliminate either one of those beasts. The gorilla seemed the first one to fall, bathing the atmosphere in its blood as it hit the ground. So, the demon turned its attention to the other beasts that it battled. The bird appeared behind the blonde, intending to swallow the demon whole. It did successfully consume the demon. However, in a battle against Gluttony, a bird was not about to out-eat the biggest eater. The brilliant blue bird flew forward, like it was trying to capture the demon form, but suddenly its head erupted in a spray of blood, and the entire bird found itself sliced in perfect halves as Gluttony emerged from within its belly. The bird beast plummeted to the ground, but the idea was not for the beasts to win the battle but to buy time. They needed time for the men to get away, all were on board, and it was time for the soldiers to hurry out of the area. Gluttony grinned as he seemed to spot the escaping soldiers, and it started making its way towards them, intending to cause carnage and harm. However, before it could get to the innocent people, the commander leapt from the ground, finally arriving at that point of the battle on time. The big man was able to grab Gluttony in a bear hug, letting the demon know that he would not be getting past that area if he could allow it. They both crashed into the floor, as the demon was too surprised to redirect, and the commander's grip was too strong to wiggle out of. The demon hissed in annoyance. It just wanted to cause havoc, but there were always soldiers in its way, and it found that so annoying. The commander's hands were flung off, and then Gluttony attacked the big guy, tossing him aside like he was nothing but discarded waste. The man was able to catch himself, though, as he would not be going down that easily either. He groaned in pain and activated the power of the tiger. The man understood that he alone would not be enough to stop gluttony. However, he gathered all of his beasts together, the bird, the tiger, and the gorilla, powering him up to 1,000 folds. Even if his mana was to run out, even if his body was torn apart, the big man was sure that he would never allow the blonde maniac to pursue his soldiers. The demon grinned at this challenge, eager to prove the big man wrong. The power of all three beasts launched at the demon of gluttony, but the demon was already ready and fired off its latest beam at the approaching beast. Each time the demon leveled up, it became even stronger than before, and this latest nuclear blast was strong and wild and powerful. It shook the city to its core and set the whole place on fire. The lieutenant found himself shaking Kim Si-hee. She had to wake quickly so that they could retreat. The lady could not accept their defeat, yelling that they had not confirmed if the sergeant was dead or not. They had to confirm this much at least. However, the lieutenant had to remind her that the sergeant was dead. They had all seen his heart get torn apart, and not even a healer of S rank could do anything at this point. They had to leave him behind. There was fighting and chaos, and Lee Hunwook continued to lie on the floor, emptily staring out at the world. The hero looked well and truly dead. However, something inside of him was activating, and it was called the Breath Room Flame Rank B. The man's life force was fading, which would cause his internal furnace to die out, and then came the warning that the relic of the fallen angel Gregory Azazel had not yet been fully absorbed. The hero continued to lie dead on the floor as the commander's beasts were ripped to shreds. The commander coughed out, acknowledging the strength of the demon that he faced. The demon still hovered, mostly unscathed by all of their attempts to bring him down. The creature then opened its giant mouth, meaning to devour the commander. The big man knelt, accepting his defeat as there was no more he could put into the fight, and he just hoped that the soldiers were able to get away in time. This was going to be the end as he knew it. However, before those tentacles could consume him, the redhead paladin showed up, fighting for their commander to stand up. The commander was horrified and asked the soldier if she had gone deaf when he gave the order to retreat. However, the lady reported that there were still some soldiers evacuating. The commander had bought them good time, but they needed some more, so she would happily spend her last moments fighting at his side. The demon of gluttony was quite annoyed to see the appearance of yet another fighter, and he reined his mouth back in. Rather interesting that he always refused to eat them when they were in full power, like perhaps his insides were his weakest link. The paladin had come to assist, but she did not come alone, as the crackle of electricity and the speed of light revealed the presence of Junmo and Surjit Choi as well. They were all ready to fight to the end, though Young Jun thought that it was pretty inconvenient that the creature chose to fly to escape their attacks. That was very annoying. The monster was also not a big fan of them, and it growled in annoyance to see them there, stretching out its hand to shoot a beam in hopes of disposing of them quickly so that it could eat them all. At any rate, the ginger turned to the commander, yelling that the man needed to escape. The monster was clearly charging up a wide area attack. Realizing how horrible that would be, the paladin grabbed the commander, and the demon of gluttony launched its attack. A rain of thunder and fire fell from the sky, and the soldiers stared in horror at such a wide attack. Ironically, the lieutenant and Sergeant Si-hee did nothing to evacuate either. However, they were focused on the body of their fallen sergeant. The corpse stared vacantly with eyes wide open. Meanwhile, the redhead platoon leader continued to do her best to escape with the commander in her arms. That blast was furious and strong, tossing aside the soldiers even as they tried to escape. Still, Hyunwook lay dead as a dodo, the relic within him slowly activating. The breath room flame once again notified him that his life force was fading, causing his internal furnace to die, and the situation was so bad that the breath room began to stutter. Then, the golden relic within him flared to life, surrounded by bright fire, and they immediately received multiple warnings and error messages at once. The skill metal bending was about to violate the rules, however. The hero could not care less, and it seemed he unconsciously worked to bend the metal for the holy relic. There was another warning that he had been caught attempting to break the rules and abuse a skill to replace his internal organs with an item that did not function that way. This immediately caused severe errors in the system. Still, the man continued to metal bed, and he replaced his missing organs with the holy relic that was floating inside of him. The errors and the warnings continued as the player was ordered to immediately stop all actions that were threatening the system. But the hero couldn't care less about that at all. His body continued to knit together as the holy relic worked to replace his heart and began to pump blood back through his system. The relic began to pump slowly like a heart, beating up and down, and a bright light filled the space, rising from the floor to the sky, and it drew the attention of the lieutenant and Si-hee, who watched with mouths agape. They stared in shock, their arms blocking their faces as they beheld a miracle happening in front of them. Even Gluttony turned when he saw that bright light, instantly knowing that something was wrong. Lee Hunwook's body had risen in the air, getting powered up like a Super Saiyan covered in red. There was then a critical system error, and the player was no longer accounted for and no longer recognized as a player. The sergeant ripped his torn shirt from his body, basically rising from the dead, and the system asked just who he was. The man replied, with vengeance in his eyes, that he was the 3rd Anti-Monster Brigade of the Steel Company, Sergeant Lee Hunwook. The player was no longer accounted for and was now free from the rules and the game's control. The man had aura farmed and cheated his way back to life, and he glanced at the game window that was acting a little wonky. The man had a lot of questions so frit, but for now, they had to take care of that monster that was standing in front of them. The glutton almost looked pleased to see its favorite enemy again, as it was overjoyed at the thought of breaking it down once again. Wickedly, he fired a beam right at Lee Hyunwook, intending to quickly end him once again. The man activated his Mogle release, and the Mowgli obeyed his summons, descending from the sky. The large sword stood before the strong fighter, and Gluttony hissed in annoyance to see the man block his blast of fire with those powerful shields once again. This was the type of fighting style that was known to drive Gluttony crazy, and he could not stand for it happening again. The monster charged up his power, getting ready to shoot again, but Hyunwook swore that he would not be regressing twice, just because of that one idiot monster. The blonde demon shot his beam of hate, and the commander and paladin watched in confusion. That big beam was coming straight at them again, and the other fighters stared in shock to see that Sergeant Lee Hyunwook had entered the battle. This was overwhelming news because they could have sworn that they saw the man die. There was no way that he could have survived that attack, and the ginger was in awe at how the man could possibly still be standing with no protective spells. The only protection that the Blueanet did have was Grigori Azazel's necklace, a legendary rank weapon that provided protection from curses and darkness, and nullified all attacks born of mana. The wide area attack made the hero's heart pound so hard because they could detect the man with that power. Now the Grigori Azazel's necklace had been bound to Lee Hyunwook, and a large amount of mana was being supplied automatically throughout his blood. However, if the user's mental control weakened, the binding would fail, and it would break his body. This was the price for immortality. If that was the case, then the Blueanet was willing to shoulder that problem. Gluttony glared at him in rage, but the monster was the last person who had the right to be upset about their current situation. The demon again fired 2 heavy pink lasers at the hero, who used his sword as a shield because he was not about to get beaten by an angry blonde tyrant. The Mowgli shards were lifted by the human, much to the horror and surprise of the blonde demon, that could not understand why his prey would not just die and stay dead. Then, the sergeant pointed intentionally at the demon of gluttony, activating his metal control. The metal within the blonde demon once again began to churn and spin as he had swallowed all of their last attack, and Gluttony found himself suddenly suffering from intense stomach aches. The demon's belly began to grow, and the sergeant reminded the monster not to ever dare look upon him. He did not take kindly to those who underestimated just how wild he could be. His fingers remained pointed as power continued to erupt through the blonde demon, and the monster thrashed and screamed, as if trying to escape the situation that it found itself in. The power within it was overwhelming, and the creature writhed on the ground in pain. Gluttony raised his head, an expression of rage and anger on his face as he faced the protagonist, who met his gaze with a level glare. The creature had devoured countless weapons, so he would never be able to escape the metal bender, and it was time to end this fight once and for all. Though with how many times they had tried to end this fight, it would be a miracle if they actually defeated Gluttony this time. The demon grinned, seeming to have yet another trick up its sleeve, and the progress screen warned that the Devil of Gluttony had upgraded its bowel system and was now absorbing the weapons inside of it to strengthen its attacks, because, of course, that happened. All the metal in the demon began to glow, and its body began to change color, leveling up the beast into a new purple hue. Gluttony screamed in triumph into the sky, seeming very pleased with this new evolution that it had manifested for itself. The thing now looked even uglier than ever, and the little boy that it had started as was long gone. The hero looked rather taken aback by yet another upgrade, and it seemed he wasn't the only one who could keep discovering cheats in a fight. So, the demon of gluttony wanted to play that game. Hyunwook could not detect metal within a 135 radius, detecting over 500 grams of metal. The giant had somehow absorbed all of the metal in its body, just like it threatened to do. Therefore, accidentally turns itself into the hero's own personal giant puppet. It was so ludicrous that Hyunwook could not stop his grin. It seemed the sergeant was not out of cheats just yet. The man stretched out both hands this time because he was dealing with such a large mass of metal and activated metal control. Gluttony was shocked to see the protagonist's control suddenly come over him, and he tried to shake it off like it was some kind of bad dream. The demon was confused and he roared in protest as if asking for an explanation behind this sudden attack, even though he had gotten stronger. The hero's eyes widened, and he noticed the creature's mouth open, once again trying to devour him. It seemed the demon thought of the man as too much of a threat to bother killing him first and was going to eat him right then. Well, the sudden turn of events was rather convenient for Lee Hunwook, who immediately grabbed one of Gluttony's very large tentacles, shocking the demon. His past self had run away the last time Gluttony tried to swallow him. However, the one being swallowed now was going to be Gluttony. That threat was definitely terrifying to the blonde monster that tried to pull its tongue back. But it was much too late for that, and the sergeant activated metal bending. The monster's body began to bend and twist and distort at the man's command. The activation of such an intense skill immediately pulled forth an error message, of course, because the hero was still breaking a lot of system rules. The hero would not care less about that, because before he faced whatever consequences came with his action, he needed the monster in front of him to give back what was his. The demon of gluttony screamed in protest, but the hero was not in the mood. All of those weapons did not belong in the monster's mouth. The hero began to tug. From deep inside of gluttony, he summoned all the things that the beast had devoured, pulling and tugging until he had pulled forth the arrow that would always hit its mark. With that, the hero activated fusion reconfiguration. The blonde hissed, looking vengeful and angry as the red spun in his hand, and he screamed at the power that overtook his body. Metal fusion tied the demon's body in knots and pulled his form until it shrank into a small, angry ball. With this, the core crystal fell from the demon's form, and the hero sent his arrow immediately, still doing long-distance attacks at this time. Fortunately, the core no longer had a physical body and could not dodge, so it was shattered, and the pop-up window popped up. The heroes had now successfully defeated the form of gluttony, which thus destroyed the King of Hell's 3 forms with his 3 cores. Thus, all the parts of the king's body had been broken down, and the descent was averted. The man now looked at the demon metal ball he had in his hand, and of course, he ate it. The sergeant was not about to let a good meal of metal go to waste after all. With that, his glitching body detected the presence of the metal and it absorbed the target. The fusion began, but the hero was warned that other additional fusion in this current state could cause his form to break. Well, the hero was well aware of that, but he had already died and come back and defeated his foe, so he no longer really had much to lose as the fusion began. The giant ball in the sky shattered into pieces, and the congratulations window showed before all the players, telling them that they had successfully cleared the sill wave. Tea was a matter of celebration as they had completely eradicated the spread of the erosion, and they had destroyed all the cores. Now they just awaited He wave clear rewards. Hyenwook stood in the light of the beautiful sun, softly acknowledging that all the sources of erosion for the sill wave had been destroyed. The mission was finally complete. After failing over and over again, the hero had finally achieved this goal. The other players gaped in shock to see that the lunatic that they believed in had actually done what was once considered impossible, and he had fought death to do it. The commander and the paladin were proud, while the lieutenant and Sergeant Sihi leapt for joy. They almost could not believe this success, and the battered world around them once again felt the light of the sun. The school children who had been rescued looked at the sky in awe, and the people who'd hidden in shelters stepped out for the first time to the dawn of a new era. It had been so long since any of them had seen that beautiful blue sky. The world had suddenly become brighter and fresher, and they rejoiced because their pain and panic were really and truly over. The sky was lit up with beautiful light and it shone over the broke soil, bringing back new hope and rejoicing to those around. Jummo stepped forward then, very concerned for their dear Sergeant Lee Unwook, and the man asked if the hero was okay. They had really cleared the sill wave. His dream had been achieved, but the sergeant was just standing there taking in the light of the sun. Still, the hero stared and then declared the ominous words that it still had not come. Just when all thought that they could celebrate, here came the sergeant to rain on their parade. The man stood there with his arms stretched, asking for something to reveal itself. The other soldiers were so confused and wondered why their commanding officer was being creepy and ominous when they should be celebrating. Unfortunately, it seemed that something had heard the man's summons because the people watched in shock and horror as something began to rise. Something weird and large popped out of a giant portal in the sky, and it looked like a big floating island. Now this was something new, and the land hovered over the entire city of Seoul. The soldiers watched with both awe and apprehension, wondering where on earth that giant castle had come from, and it was on a floating island of all things. The soldiers panicked that even at this stage they had to face even more enemies, and no one was looking forward to doing anything like that. This giant floating island sparked with great power, but the sergeant just watched it come, knowing that this was the artificium of the sky Laputa, an unidentified object of ancient metal language. Laputa requires the ownership of the Master Key artifact to unlock, and it seemed to be talking about the key that our bro just swallowed and made into his heart. The giant island hovered close to the sergeant, who stretched out his hand towards the giant construction, and he recalled all the hard things that he'd had to go through in order to stop the beginning of the net of humanity. He and his soldiers had sacrificed way too much for this moment to come, and with dozens of memories flitting through his head, the man looked seriously at the floating island as he spoke the magical words. Now, with Laputa, he would prevent all of their deaths. The gathered group were immediately congratulated for being the first in the entire history to clear a wave. Seal would now receive a special reward for all of its efforts. This special reward then descended from the sky, a floating island. The people gathered stared in awe at the castle that had suddenly appeared on a floating island, and for a moment, they feared that more enemies might have appeared. However, this giant platform descended quite close to our dude, who stretched out his hand to welcome it, as he had been waiting for this moment for a very long time. The wave-clear reward was the artifact of the sky Laputa, an ancient material of holy properties, with special authority requirements to claim ownership of the island. They needed a master key. The giant island hovered just above Seoul, much to the surprise of the Sil survivors, and they were informed that the source of erosion had finally been eradicated and the reward distribution quickly began. Equipment and relics were distributed according to battle participation experience, and the top 15% that participated in the Wave Clear mission would get rewards like corruption resistance and stealth modifier in areas of deterioration. The surviving soldiers were surprised to see their screens pop up, and they stared at them in awe and joy. The rewards for the top 15% included Purification Mission participant. Their damage ability went up, and so did their corruption resistance and other factors unique to their skill. The soldiers celebrated to see that they had leveled up once again, and at this rate, they were sure to become the best in the company. It was just as their Sergeant Lee Hunwook had predicted, and they were very pleased to see that he was right. The little girl that they saved pointed in awe at the sky, asking if the nightmare was really over, and if there would be any more monsters coming. Honestly, no one had ever cleared a wave before, so they were not too sure, but one of the men was very convinced that there would be no more monsters from now on. The war was over, and they had survived. It was a great cause for celebration. The girls were relieved, and the smaller one cried out tears of joy, unable to believe that she had survived that hellish night. The lieutenant screamed out in victory when he noticed that he had leveled up once again, and he had to apologize for scaring his colleague because it had been a while since he had been rewarded for the good work that he had done. The commander chuckled in amusement to see that he also leveled up, though he thought it was rather embarrassing to upgrade from commanding alone. The top 10% of battle participants also got unique rewards too. A full player set called Orihalkan, which was rare too. Seo Yunha gasped and gushed over her reward in awe and joy, knowing that they had to start cleaning up the city immediately, but she was enjoying herself too much at the moment. The platoon leader quickly turned, saying that she would send in a report on what they could do to quickly make repairs in the necessary areas. However, the commander just laughed and told the sweet girl to claim her rewards first. There was no need to rush, and she had earned the 5 seconds of peace. Besides, they could do a lot with these extra bonuses after all. The girl was surprised but also very thankful, because she really wanted to get over her reward just a little longer. Junmo, who was also considered part of the top 10% of participants, had received a dark wood wand, which was also of rare rank, and the boy gasped in awe that he had made the top 10%. He even got a quest reward item, and the youth was amazed. The brunette was so happy to see a reward, knowing that he had always been of F rank, but now he was a proper player, and he nearly cried for joy. The corporal was so excited that he started yelling out to Sergeant Lee Hyunwook, calling out for the man to see that he had leveled up to the top 5%, and he was so thrilled about it that it was kind of adorable. Even the sergeant had received a reward, and he smiled fondly at his fellow F-rank heir as he received the Ring of Gigas, which had the incredible skill of making him invisible and undetected. It was nice to have something useful, and he smiled in satisfaction to finally get the exact reward that he had been waiting for. The man knew quite a few heroes who went missing because of this item, so with this, he had saved their lives as well, and it was such a relief. The ring slowly began to be invisible on his hand, and the man paused for a moment to think if this was really everything, there had to be more rewards regarding the Laputa. Just as he thought that, another reward was gifted, the portable auto, adaptive shield, and it was gifted this time to the ginger, with the ability to develop in dangerous situations, with increased effectiveness with other skills. The ginger was not as amazed or pleased with his gift. In fact, it almost seemed like he did not want it. Since it was a shield, he figured he would give it to the kid he loved so dearly and happily. He claimed the reward with a smile on his face. The commander was still in work mode, of course, and he called for the steel company to round up immediately. They had defeated the foes, but the city was still in a heavy state of disrepair. For now, they had to immediately start clean up, find survivors and rescue anyone who was trapped in small crevices. A giant portal had opened up in front of them, and it seemed to be the gate that the island had crawled out of. The soldiers stared in shock at this new gate, and suddenly they got a hidden quest. How annoying. The gate wanted them to take the part of the ancient civilization's successor. As the greatest contribution to clearing the wave, they now had the chance to succeed in ancient civilization. Only one person was allowed to proceed, of course, and they were to explore the ruins of the gnome and conquer the guardians of the ruins to stop its operation. Then they would verify the master key with the ancient device and gain access to Laputa. It was exactly what the hero had suspected, and he gritted his teeth to see a hidden quest. It would be nice to rest first before rushing into battle, and he stared at the gaping hole, cursing the system for not making any of this easy. Then, the Bluenet, fresh from battle, turned to his commander and apologized that he would not be able to help with the clean-up process since he would have to do this first. The commander was rightfully concerned and asked the suicidal maniac if he truly would be alright going in alone. After all, the man did not at all seem all that great. Even the redhead was worried and felt like they should at least contact the healers before letting him leave like this. The platoon leader ordered Lee Hyunwook to at least gather himself before her set off to these ancient ruins. The man had just died. The sergeant thought that caring about first aid and recovery was such an annoying pain, but the city was in ruins, and he was admittedly tired from the last battle. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, the first hero, Tazen, had been gifted with new equipment, the Demon Claw Greaves, to make his punches even deadlier with demonic class resistance. A pretty sweet weapon. The fist fighter somehow looked very upset to be receiving a reward in this annoying situation, where he had been pushed around by his enemy. The man cursed and spat about how low the first king had fallen, and he somehow cursed the foreigner that he was so sure was just an anim nerd. He even promised to kill him. Later on, when the sergeant was a bit more rested and cleaned up, the commander ordered Sergeant Lee Hyunwook to carry out the hidden quest as he so desired. The Bluenet saluted the man before him, reporting his willingness to do so. The big man had a lot of questions for the younger man, but he would ask them after the man had returned. For now, he wished the young soldier good luck, and the platoon leader reminded the sergeant not to die, since he seemed rather fond of entering near-death scenarios that ached their heart. That last one was not an order but a request, and the sergeant smiled. He told his friends not to worry about him, saying that he came there prepared to die, but he did not intend to die twice. The redhead was surprised to hear these words, and the man got serious as he turned towards the portal that had opened before him and then entered the hidden gate. Somehow, the news channels were still working, and that was the most unbelievable reality so far. The news reported the existence of Laputa, floating above the skies of Seoul. The entire world of politics now had its eyes on Seoul at the moment, and many people in different countries checked their phones in awe. It seemed Seoul had not been the only place to clear its wave and gain a blue sky. The Korean army was noted to have defeated the final GAT Corps, though sacrificing a lot. They had not fallen to the wave like many other countries had. The first wave in California, the second in Shanghai, and the third in Berlin had seemed to be a challenge thought impossible to beat by humans. However, a country in Asia, South Korea, had defeated the Sil wave for the first time ever, and this was making international news. The whole world was sending messages of congratulations to Seoul for being the first, and the defeat of the Sil wave was a miracle and something to celebrate. However, considering the large amounts of energy stored in Laputa, the politicians suddenly dared to discuss the next step as if it were their decision, and if they had done anything to help stop the Sil wave. Sil was now a symbolic meeting place of the past and the present all of a sudden, and they applauded the heroes for saving the day. But now the greedy politicians were saying that they needed a fair and reasonable solution for the usage of this global relic. Every international political leader was saying this, saying that Sil's victory was a cultural blessing, but they needed to take a calculating approach in dividing the fruits of the victory. All these entitled jerks were acting like they had any say in how Sil's rewards would be divided when they had not fought for it or sacrificed anything to achieve it. All those jerky politicians continued to go on and on about how Laputa should belong to the human race, as if the human race contributed anything when it came to helping Sil. The Koreans had fought on their own for a long time, and here these jerks were trying to steal their rewards, saying that Laputa was a gift for humanity. More and more politicians came on the news saying this greedy and selfish nonsense. Their confidence to claim someone else's win was honestly very embarrassing. Of course, in America, something else was going on. In the U.S. Special Operations Command, a soldier marched through the compound, a gas mask on his face, as he walked into a room lined with other soldiers at attention. They all stood steady, of every shape and size and race, and the soldier walked into the premises and also stood at attention before the others, taking off his mask in the safe area. According to the intelligence, because those sneaky jerks were already doing this own private investigation, nobody had gotten the master rights to Laputa. Under the current world order, they were constantly towing the line between peaceful balance and war. Trust humans to always find a way to fight each other, even with literal monsters around. Depending on who owned that floating fortress, the world would see a new leader, lost technologies, and would fight to see who would get that ancient relic. Many countries around the world were already gunning for the opportunity and sending special forces to Seoul, because stealing was apparently fine if they did it for their country. Political leaders were so shameless, but the army man said that they would not take what was not theirs. They were going to protect the glory of the great America. Despite saying all that, he then said that they were going to secure the master rights to Laputa for the sake of world peace, and he sent his soldiers off, darkly returning the mask to his face. This man was Colonel Garrett Whitman, commander of the Special Forces in the United States and an A-rank player. There was so much death in the area of Seoul, but it seemed one person had survived. How lousy of the monsters to do such a bad job that they did not even successfully tear apart that stupid pig. There had been so many of them, but they failed to kill one human. It was unbelievable. Still, the pig guy looked really messed up, and he shook with pain in his effort to stand. However, there was suddenly a boy staring at him. That child looked eerily familiar to the boy that the ginger had picked up. The boy stared with empty eyes, not at all bothered to see a grown man torn apart and dying on the streets. The dying player stared at the boy, unable to speak. That was when the boy's eyes grew red with wicked glee. This was the worst. The little child was a necromancer, and he activated his effect to absorb the skill of the target. There was a small chance for the thoughts of the eaten target to enter the user, and if the control failed, they would transform into wrong thoughts. The necromancer summoned a creature much like a giant snake, and this large monster stretched forth to devour the dying beast tamer, consuming Chu Kyoyang's monster, breaking skill. The skill reconfiguration was in progress, and the young boy stood over the corpse in silence and satisfaction, a dark aura around him. The hidden quest, the path of the ancient civilization's successor, had opened up to Heinwook Lee, and the dedicated soldier was ready to conquer it alone. The man raced through the greenery that greeted him, wondering how on earth this was supposed to be a puzzle quest, and he thought that it was making a complete fool out of him. Still, time continued to count down, and he had about 12 seconds left to find one piece before the Guardian of the Ruins caught up to him. The Guardian of the Ruins was a giant warrior in a massive and thick suit of armor. A truly impressive and terrifying piece of work with an even deadlier weapon. The sergeant just barely managed to dodge the strike of that mighty weapon, the coiled chains dancing around him as he missed the brunt of each attack. Of course, the hero was not about to stand idly by and get railed. The Bluenet summoned the release of some of his powers, tossing the never-failing arrow at the giant that chased him. There were now 6 seconds left, so the man had to hurry. The sergeant raced forward, dodging 2 guardians and casting his release at them too. 2 seconds left, but the hero hurried on, growling that he just didn't have time to waste on NMPCC fighters. He raced forward and completed the mission he'd come for, eyes widening in surprise when the whole place lit up. Lee Hanwook was immediately congratulated for connecting all the circuits. All the curious puzzles of the Akashic Armory were placed successfully into their respective spots, and the reward was the Akashic Armory. The man stood now before the 2 attacking guardians that suddenly returned to their resting positions before him, like they recognized him as worthy. Then a blue light flooded the room, filling some parts of the area with hues of purple, and the hero groaned, wondering what on earth was happening now. This system that he worked with was never the type to be kind enough to give him something easy to work with. Suddenly, the blue thing in front of him began to speak to life, and the hero tensed, bracing himself for anything that would appear at this crucial moment. The window popped up, still as damaged and shaky as ever since his fight against Gluttony, and it informed him that his main and sub quests were completed. The circuit was stabilized, but the administrator authentication was not done yet. As it was, the player just did not match the records in the system, and it was having a whole breakdown over it. Naturally, Hyunwook was furious about the whole thing, and he yelled, asking why he'd been given the quest if they were just going to fail to recognize him at the end of it. He had come all this way and had conquered all those guardians to get to the front of the gate. There was nothing else that he could have possibly done in a battle heated enough to nearly claim his life. His body had been corrupted to win the battle against the enemy, and there was nothing that he could do about that anymore. In the end, what Bakesel said all came true. The lady had yelled that it was insanity to replace his body with items, and that such a thing would definitely kill him, even if he did succeed. He would end up outside of the system's parameters, and he could lose his powers or be expelled from the system and omitted from all quests. Such a risky operation was sure to affect him negatively somehow, and she had pretty much guessed correctly. Back then, Baxel had warned the hero that he did not just belong to himself anymore, so he must never think of doing something unverified like that for everyone else's sake. She dreaded the idea of something like that ever happening. Unfortunately, something like that had happened after all, and now the hero found himself in a fix. In his last life, where they had failed the wave, Laputa was not a reward but a disaster, and it had been said back then that humans did not have the right to use the ruins. Even though it said that, the villains had been able to use the weapons of Laputa, and that was naturally very annoying. The Blueonette then grinned that this was good news however, because it meant that there was surely some other way to get in. This was why one needed to look at contracts very carefully to find a well-designed loophole. The system flashed with many error warnings, but that was old news now and basically background music to the hero's schemes. Only the emergency key could allow the hero to enter in accordance with the administrator's emergency protocol. The reason that the man had visited that tree jerk in the Sill Station gate was just so that he could obtain key number 2 for the Akashic Armory, and he grinned like a devil as the golden key popped up in his hand. No matter if access was restricted or not, the man was determined to go in since his people would need those tools anyway. He slipped the key into the lock, and it sparked as a recognition pattern ran through the whole door. The door split from top to bottom, the symbol on the door lit and magic charged around it as it finally swung open. The sergeant was surprised, covering his eye from the bright light that emitted from behind the door, staring in surprise when he saw something that looked much like a round table meeting hall. The hero gasped, wondering why on earth there was nothing substantial behind the door that he had just opened. He searched around desperately for any sign of weapons or, at last, the master key. He could not believe that this equipment was missing. Suddenly, he raised his head to see something suddenly come bouncing over, and it looked much like a cyber camera that was about the size of a football. It turns out that the spherical object was almost the size of a small table, and it hovered over the sergeant. The hero had fought countless foes and immediately got into battle stance, thinking perhaps that this creature would also be a threat. However, this item was just scanning the hero that stood before it. A quick scan of the sergeant and the man was lit up in beautiful galaxy colors as it took in as much information about the man as it could. However, there remained error after error from the messages detected. Although the scan results stated that the player had the right to be the successor, he had also lost his identity, and they just could not work with that. They were so particular about this nonsense that identity theft seemed to be the only way to go from now on. In accordance with the emergency protocol, the system would not conduct additional tests for the Blueonette to prove himself. Of course, that happened. The man now had to survive against summoned entities for a set number of times, and more of those guardians popped out of nowhere. The error screen still wobbled its way through the instructions he would need to survive this game. Additional tests were to be conducted to identify him, so now he had to fight the defender of Laputa. The whole exercise was to test his survival and suitability. Passing the test would grant them temporary ruin succession access. The Blueonette was shocked, but the Guardian was not about to give him even the time to complain, and the giant-formed figure launched right at him. Lee Hunwook jumped quickly out of the way, quickly studying his opponent. The hero gritted his teeth, saying that at least he had been given a chance, so he would be grateful for this opportunity, though he found it very annoying. Still, as long as he took down this one guy, then he could get what he wanted. The new enemy fighter was now just a robot created with Hextech, and he was ready to finish the creature. The man sparked as he tossed his never-failing arrow again, hoping to bring down his opponent in one blow. Obviously, that did not work and the opponent managed to deflect the sparking weapon, which greatly impressed the hero. The Guardian's eyes flowed maliciously and it focused on the human, focused on its goal of annihilation, and the camera continued to watch the whole fight proceed. Lee Hunwook had previously wondered what the camera meant by test, but it seemed like it was never intended to give him access to the goo in the first place. However, the sergeant had no intention of returning empty-handed. Instead, the young sergeant swore that he was going to rat his own right to us in this place, no matter what. The Guardian either could not make sense of his words, or it did not just care less because it quickly charged at the man once again, but the hero stood his ground. Summoning up his power, the man jumped, saying that he had not regressed quite easily after he sacrificed his heart. The hero then activated the Metal Smash version up. His power activated, eyes glowing faint blue, but the attack burned to red in the Super Metal Smash. Meanwhile, back in the human world, small lights brought illumination to small human settlements, and of course, small human armies. It seemed even Inia was sitting out and the fighters were told that their identities would be erased once they began the mission. This entire mission was top secret, but they were sending so many men out there to get it done. So many shameless thieves want to get their hands on the Laputa, and even the South African army had mobilized, encouraged to think of their families that awaited the news of their success. If they succeeded, then they would be recognized as a first world country. Russia was also having out. It seemed every world power on every continent was doing its best to acquire those weapons, and they swore to possess top-tier arms as soon as they conquered Laputa. All the soldiers were to bet their lives on that mission. At a time when fighting should be over to some degree, human armies prepared to fight themselves. The preparations for the United States were completed, and the man looked up, all geared up in his camouflage outfit, and encouraging words were yelled out at the soldiers. The men were encouraged and told that they were the best in the world, and that they would continue to be. They had to be proud and to conquer the ruins that they desired, the ruins that Hyunwook was currently trying to conquer. Green lights ahead and a group of soldiers gather around the warp gate. They halt all in neat and beautiful lines, ready to give their all to fight for their country. It was the American army that was the first before a warp gate, and then they were deployed, a fighter running headfirst into an unfamiliar country with unfamiliar terrain. They leapt through the portal and reappeared in Korean airspace, falling like stars from the sky. Meanwhile, the Korean soldiers were still very busy trying to clean up and repair their destroyed homes, just for the colonizers to pull up just in time and ruin their day. Junmo noticed the falling soldiers first and called out to the paladin, telling her of the place and positions of these strangers falling from the sky. The redhead immediately recognized them as a threat and yelled the warning of the ambush to her superior officer. The commander has also noticed the colonizers and cursed at how quickly they had moved out. Multiple countries were dropping from warps in the sky, all of them gunning to steal what was not theirs. There were currently 9 confirmed warps, all likely from 9 different countries. One of the descending soldiers suddenly got hit with firepower mid-air, much to the surprise of his colleague. Enemy attack was identified, and another of the falling soldiers opened fire, shooting as they fell. It seemed all of these strangers and enemies had suddenly stopped mid-air to fight each other, engaging in international battles in Sill's airspace. Back at the American portal gate, their commander told them to keep up the good work at firing their weapons, but they had to drop quickly onto Laputa's surface. More than anything, they needed to be the first to land on the ruins, and the soldiers warred and fought, shooting each other like their lives depended on it. This was because, more than anything, they could not forget that their only target was Laputa. All of these shameless soldiers fell like stars from the sky, each from different countries, and all trying to take over a treasure that was not even theirs. On sensing all of these intruders, Laputa's defense systems activated to protect itself, summoning the automatic 2-layer defense protocol. The first layer pulled forth the holy field, and the all-encompassing collision barrier created from an ancient energy matrix. The second layer came with lightning strikes, an arcane field that would shield the holy field. Immediately, the special island lit up when all of its fancy defense activated, shielding and protecting it from the harm that the soldiers would bring. The foreigners still charged forward, unbothered by all the lights that had activated over their target. Some of the men who made instant contact with Laputa immediately got electrocuted, the shield throwing them aside. Others merely bounced off the protective barrier unharmed. It was a fireworks of attacks from the sky to the island, and the whole thing was so intense that Laputa seemed to turn into a living storm in the sky. The island thundered and sparked, and the soldiers studied this new 2-layer defense system that had been activated on Laputa. Thus, some of the soldiers who had come prepared quickly activated their personal protective equipment, starting tactical skydiving protocols. The Americans seemed to have a special skydiving armor that apparently created a shield around the air and could negate the danger from magic, shock, and electricity, because of course it could. Of course, this equipment also had its limits, but it could absorb the shock from a landing and was great at keeping serious damage away from the wearer. It was money well spent and would be fun to watch in action if it was not being wielded by the enemy, who had shown up to steal and destroy. The first soldiers land on the shield and happily report that their personal protective equipment was working just fine, and it saved them from any serious damage. With that positive report, the soldiers continued their descent, and all of them pushed forward to land on the island. Of course, in the air, war was still waged between soldiers of different countries. Some of them could not make it to the island, so they were determined to take down the ones that could. It was a fierce battle of both power and wit, and the sky thundered as various soldiers flew around, firing arms and weapons. There was a report from the Lieutenant Breeson. It seemed that most of the men were fighting in the sky, and no more than 10 had made it to the landing point. Still, the soldiers would continue the mission as their protective shield would last 5 minutes at most. So they did not dare wait for the others, or they would be fried. Instead, they needed to get through this defense matrix immediately. The soldiers agreed with the man's judgment and were all ready to give their all to achieve success. Thus, all the soldiers would then begin Laputa defense shield penetration, breaking in like it was their birthright. The tactical knife being used was called the Acid Bane, and it used poison materials from an acid Draco. It could be used without mana and could disable all magic. Sergeant Serrano was told to stand by in preparation to help. Those who could fly and those were left were to fire back against other countries until these greedy guys with the best equipment could get exactly what they came for. Everyone present was in agreement that their needs came first, so they charged on. No matter what, the Americans had to be the first to enter the Laputa control rooms and seize all the power. Meanwhile, our guy was already deep inside the Laputa, having no idea what was going on outside, and he activated his metal bending to fight against the foe in front of him. His power activated, burning to dangerous red and shattering the creature before him, the one that he fought against. Really hard to fight against a metal bender when your body was made of the material that bent to his will. The sergeant was serious against his foe, gritting his teeth as he waited for their next move. The hulking monster was not quite done yet, a giant thing it was with dangerous spikes protruding from every orifice. The hero once again got yet another error code. His metal bending fusion was reconfiguring, and the effects had now changed, causing the free manipulation of metal in a wide area and ultra defense complex fusion. This was great news to the young man who stretched out his hand and then activated the fusion reconfiguration as all the metal in the room bent to his will. The man squeezed it up into a ball, closing his fist so it could get smaller and smaller. With metal bending, he had detached the creature's body from its head and then squeezed it so small that it could no longer fight back. Finally, the man had overcome the trials and tribulations that had been set up for him to face, and he had collected a freed weapon. This was a legendary rank shield with flight ability. It was so cool and could reflect physical and magical damage. This item was, of course, restricted to being used only by the successor of Laputa. With that, the hero turned to the giant globe in the sky, hoping for some recognition finally. The globe studied him, scanning the player in front of it once more. Lee Hyun-wook tensed for a moment, a scowl on his face as he told the globe not to make him do anything weird again. He had already been through enough just to come here, and fighting any more monsters would be ridiculous. The island had said that it would be a puzzle, but he'd just gotten hazed since the moment he stepped on the island, and he did not like it. With those words, the man pushed the metal ball to his mouth, intending on snacking on it. He did not like that the creature was trying to kill him, and wondered if he really had the right to this place. Hyun-wook assured the scanner that if it did that again, then he would be eating it as well. The robot scanned the man, assessing his threats and promises, and studied his every move. Finally, the red on the scanner gracefully turned to blue, and it seemed that the hero had finally been acknowledged. Identity verification was complete, and the young man had successfully passed the ruined successor test. The man had now been given temporary administrator rights, providing administrator master key to him for his use. The control core, which seemed to be the creature scanning him, was called Talos, and it was an artificial intelligence core with Laputa's master key embedded in it. It allowed on to enter Laputa's central command rooms. It allowed the disabling of administrator verifications, and gave priority to ancient system activation. The man's eyes widened to hear this, and he pointed at the globe with very childish laughter. So, it was the little floating thing that was the key after all. That was really shocking, and he now understood why the key was so naggy. He encouraged the little thing not to be shy, and to let him love tea. The key was not at all impressed by this grouchy behavior, and imposed a restriction due to vulgar language. Now, Hyun-wook had to choose between the master key or the freedom to possess with him outside. The bot really whirled its back to the man like a huffy girlfriend breaking up with him. Even the sergeant was rather stunned by this behavior. It turned out that the key to access a treasure of weapons was a rather uppity princess type. The hero threw a fit, yelling that he said he'd be nice to the big globe, so it should stop messing with him. Of course, that vulgar language was not scoring him any affection points either. Suddenly, the brunette smirked when he realized something. The globe had said that it possessed only one to bring outside, and the globe turned curiously at the hero's smile. The hero tasked the artificial intelligence with just what it meant to possess again, and that meant to belong and to own. Well, this was great news to the hero, such great news that the camera orb began to sweat, suspecting something that it could not believe. Only Hyun-wook could make a machine sweat, and the brunette grinned wickedly, realizing that he just needed to devour the globe and become the key all by himself, especially as the key looked so tasty looking in that moment. Meanwhile, the global thieves were still hard at work outside, and they were doing their best to cut through the shield of Laputa. They put in all that effort into breaking and entry, and diplomacy was probably nothing more than an after, though to them. At any rate, the shield was finally opening, and they would finally be able to enter the secret island and snatch as much as they desired. The rest of the soldiers were to prepare to enter Laputa, but they had to act fast so that no other enemy soldiers would be able to slip through. They had to get in before someone got there. There was a flash of power, and suddenly a huge explosion sent soldiers flying, parachutes popping up on different sides of the island. The raging fire grew even wider, surrounding the island's defenses like it were consuming them. The soldiers had to groan and block their eyes from the bright light, cursing because they had fumbled, and it was much too late. Korea's tactical nuke of a human had shown up, and the man had come much faster than the soldiers had expected. It was the AMT, the 3rd Anti-Monster Brigade Commander, the Brigadier General Cho Jung-kyeol, and he was ranked the 31st in Korea, an A-rank player and able to cast large-scale light magic all by himself. The chief roared in rage, asking who dared to try and mess with Korea's sky. Such a sin was unforgivable and he would not stand back and watch it happen. More explosions rocketed through the sky, tossing foreign attackers left and right, throwing them right off Laputa and defending their new national treasure. The soldiers below watched in awe and a portal gate opened behind them, just in time for Lee Hyun-wook to pop back out of Laputa, and the man gaped in awe to see that they were now under attack. Junmo was shocked and relieved to see the sergeant return unharmed, and the man asked what on earth was going on. An invasion had begun while he was away, and the Brigadier General himself had to step up to protect them. It was all really intense. The sergeant tensed up in horror to hear this, and his pouty tech girlfriend popped out beside him. It seemed he had not eaten the ball after all. The others stared in shock at the giant thing that Lee Hyun-wook had brought with him, and they quickly told him to turn around. Something weird had appeared behind him. However, the hero had to quickly assure them that it was perfectly fine, and the big globe hid behind the smaller man. It was the control artificial intelligence of Laputa, also known as the Master Key, and it was just floating around casually behind the sergeant while foreigners fought to steal it from the island. Then Commander Kim Kang-seok was suddenly contacted by the Belgrade commander. The man had taken down as many fighters as needed, but he was now reaching his battle limit. Then, he asked how much progress they had made in securing the Master Key. It turned out that the Master Key was actually pretty secure, and Lee Hyun-wook effectively communicated that he now had the Master Key. All that was left was for them to enter the control room. The Brigadier was all down for that and asked the sergeant what he needed to get this done. All Hyun-wook needed was for the sergeant to do what he did best. He was to destroy everything and clear up a path for him to pass through. The Brigadier was beyond happy to hear that. So happy that he remarked that he really liked that about the man. Thus the man summoned the biggest explosion that he could, charging it up around the island as the sergeant watched. The power was so large that the very ground shook beneath them, and the Brigadier laughed that he would be going all out. The explosion that the man conjured up was massive, and he was going to show these jerks clearly why they should fear a tactical nuke. The sergeant declared that they must do what they did best and destroy everything to clear a path. Thus, explosions flew into the air, shining golden light over the chaos that bubbled in the sacred place. The old military man was happy for the permission to go all out, and he declared that he would show these jerks clearly why they should fear a tactical nuke. Saying these words, the old man happily unleashed his full potential, sending explosions through the air as he knocked out those foreign soldiers left and right. The man called to Commander Kim Kang-seok, even as all the other thieving brats from the other countries returned fire, as if they had any right to. The large golden explosion grew and grew behind the old military man, and when they tried to fire on him, a large beautiful blue bird appeared, blocking off their shots and keeping the old man safe. The gathered soldiers were shocked that they would be blocked this way. Meanwhile, the commander down below called out to Lee Hyun-wook, explaining that he had to go and aid the commander. Those who survived the crash would surely go after him soon, so they needed a proper line of defense. Now Kang-seok did not have much mana left either, as most of his main summons were injured from the battle. He would not be much help to the young sergeant even if he went with him. Besides, the old military man would be defenseless after he uses his skill. The sergeant completely agreed with this assessment and wanted the commanders to back each other up. So, the commander asked the sergeant to take care of his men. It was his only request. Then, the commander launched off, and the other special agents turned to their sergeant, clearly awaiting further instructions. For now, it was best for the rest of them to head into Laputa. The electricity kid was surprised by this order, asking the sergeant how they were supposed to get to it when it was in the sky. They had so little faith, but Hyun-wook just shrugged and pointed to his giant key, saying that the big orb would take care of it. Suddenly, all three special soldiers were wrapped in bubbles of blue, much to their surprise. They were taken into the air, the key carrying them away. Youngjun shivered inside the weird blue bubble and groaned about reaching his fighting limit. He desperately needed some alcohol to recharge. Meanwhile, someone was arguing with Sergeant Kim Si-hee, and insisted that she had to obey an order. The commander had already used his skill. If she did what she wanted to do, she could end up caught up in the attack. Still, the young girl just told the lieutenant to open a warp next to Laputa. She would handle the rest. There was no way that the Sergeant Lee Hunwook was okay now. He needed all of the help that he could get. The lieutenant had to admit that this was true, but their orders was to stay in the rear. Plus, the girl didn't necessarily owe the man anything, so he had no idea why she was going so far. Well, she did owe him a lot, as she recalled how hard the man had fought for her. She recalled how kind he had been to check on her from time to time, and the history that they had briefly shared. The young girl smiled as she admitted that she still felt like she owed him something, even though her debt was not truly heavy. The fighting went on between the soldiers in the air, and they regrouped to re-strategize, analyzing each other. It seemed they'd taken a break from just shooting at each other, and were now focusing their hatred and attacks on the giant blue bird in front of them, determined to take the poor thing down. The old military man could not stand the sight and success of those awful men trying to rob them, which was true. Now they dared to hang up on an old man like cowards. The sky lit up behind them, and the man's bomb grew even bigger and bigger, until it was darn near supernova. At this point, the man decides that his bomb was big enough, and he curses at the men who would dare come to rob them. He fired the bomb at them, telling those brats to get off his lawn. The soldiers moved quickly, trying to evade the effects of the blast, and all men were asked to take cover. The result of that large explosion lit up the world for miles. Even the commander down below flinched at the incoming storm. Lee Hunwook raised his arm in the bubble to protect himself as that explosion hit the area, and it resounded in a nightly kaboom that shook the world around them. Terrifying, merciless, and powerful that explosion was. The smoky aftermath left just the glowing shield over the Laputa shining brilliantly like a beautiful blue moon. The old man still hovered over the world, panting as he caught his breath, staring out at the cleared path. The man was exhausted now and said to Sergeant Lee Hunwook that he believed in him. The sergeant thanked the old man with great gratitude in his heart, and he promised to definitely secure the Laputa. With all that said and done, the four fighters pressed forward with the key between them. The Laputa interim administrator was confirmed and the threat of the external breach at 7%, partially disabling defenses and securing the entryway. A piece in the shield had opened, and the sergeant's team progressed towards it, hurrying so that no one would catch them off guard. They drew closer and closer, and Hunwook had a serious expression on his face. They drew closer and closer to that opening, and they finally went in. The team hovered over the very gorgeous and beautiful city of Laputa that the foreigners were trying to wreck. As the sergeant looked down at the city, he swore to have it in this life, which could come off as creepy, but he was talking about the Hextech city Laputa. A little circle above the opening began to spin suddenly, and the Sergeant Kim Si broke out from it, just barely managing to slip through the cracks. Meanwhile, in the Golden City down below, the other members of the team had just landed and were looking around in awe. Junmo was amazed as he had never imagined that there would be a city like that on the Sky Island. He had even thought that these ruins were ancient, but everything around looked new and expensive. Youngjun continued to die from alcohol deprivation behind him. The system began to set off a warning, telling them not to touch. Any damage done to this beautiful city would surely result in immediate execution, which was for the best. Junmo immediately pulled his hands away in shock and surprise. Laputa could designate a Balabalber to create a wide area blessing and Hextech buff. This was what a special Hextech zone was called. Additionally, Laputa, unlike the rooted world tree, could travel anywhere and was able to not only defend but also bomb its targets. It was the pinnacle of Hextech. That golden island that shone with light and wonder, and the cream of the crop technology of the ancient gnome civilization. Everyone was asked to handle it all with care. Simply put, Laputa possessed the ability to bring about massive wealth and power for whoever region takes ownership of it. It also means that the owners of this floating battleship can attack anywhere in the world. Then the sergeant grinned at the key, pointing out that it seemed to talk a lot when it was time to brag. The key had nothing to say to that. They had arrived at the entrance of the control room, and the key asked them to please validate their interim administrator authority that would grant them temporary permission to be there. They had come before yet another beautiful glowing structure. The sergeant turned back to the team and explained that only he could enter the control room because he was the administrator. They were to please wait outside until he came back, and he would be back soon. Suddenly, the man paused when he saw multiple metal readings. The man screamed out, warning his team about the 9 o'clock ambush just as attacks were fired on them. It was just as suspected. The enemy had used the brief opening to slip in as well. The paladin pulled forth her shield, blocking the attack as gorgeous feathers of light surrounded her and formed a shield against a rain of gunfire. The Holy Dome suffered multiple damage as that gunfire continued, and the Paladin was left gaping in shock when the dome finally shattered. Suddenly, someone yelled for the gunfire to cease, and it stopped. The Korean soldiers looked up in alarm and confusion, and that was when the enemy declared that this was a warning shot. The man had no desire to cause any unnecessary bloodshed, or so he said after breaking and entering into someone else's earned artifact. The military man demanded that they hand over the master key and surrender, then he would let them live. The servant grit his teeth in frustration, noting that these jerks had destroyed the holy shield in one attack. More than that, he had not even realized that they were there before they attacked. These bandits were not threats that could so easily be overlooked. Plus, that warning shot proved that they were not bluffing. These guys were strong. There were about 3 of them, standing armed and dangerous in built war suits, and the man wondered if they were from the Villain Association. Then, Hyunwook tapped Junmo on the chest, signaling for the soldiers to wait for his command. They were not to make any stupid moves so as not to provoke the enemy. The head thief then demanded that they hand over the master key. However, the servant just smiled, thinking that the enemy was rather unfortunate. They should not have come to face him in armor. The sergeant rushed forward, telling all the soldiers to spread out at his command. They were to get to their rear and commence anti-personnel combat. The enemy leader was confused by this seemingly foolish assault, and the gunman prepared to fire once again. The main character reached out towards the enemy's metal and got the usual error message as he activated his skill. At any rate, all those pop-ups would have stopped him from using his power, so he went right ahead and stretched out his hand to activate fusion reconfiguration. The error message once again warned of unforeseen results if he continued in this manner, and the error got higher. There was confirmed multiple usage of unregistered skill. The unidentified player was also the source of errors, and the system began a purge. The extermination was in progress at the worst possible time. It would be best to wait for them to at least deal with the Americans. However, the extermination did not care, and right before them, the sergeant began to disintegrate. The soldier had taken too many risks, and it was now catching up to him. The armored attacker took advantage of the moment of confusion to unleash a punch on the sergeant, and the man was too distracted as he was currently fighting with his glitching body. The redhead paladin was shocked to see him fading away. Even the electricity boy was shocked. They called out for their Sergeant Lee Hyunwook as he suddenly exploded in a cloud of white mist. However, taking his place was a wind spirit that blocked the attack from the big armored soldier. The man looked up in shock at the beautiful figure of a soldier in the air. Immediately she was recognized by her peers, and the main character was surprised to note the appearance of Sergeant Kim Si-hee. The lady had come to render support, and she called out to the other sergeant, saying that she was here to save him. The brilliant, beautiful figure of the glowing spirit had appeared to fight off the enemies that threatened to overwhelm them. Sergeant Hyunwook was surprised to find that Sergeant Kim Si-hee had come to their rescue after all. The younger sergeant called out to her superior, declaring that she had come to save him, of course. The battle raged on at the special sacred ground, and the wind sergeant tensed when the enemy aimed a scary-looking gun in her direction. She leapt into the air, dodging the onslaught of golden bullet rain that was targeted at her. The attack chased the flying sergeant, who bobbed and weaved her way out of the range of attacks. As for the wind spirit, she was surprised when she got attacked, the enemy throwing a punch at her blocked arm defense. A red mark appeared where the punch had been placed, and the girl was alarmed, gasping as a light spread from where she'd been hit, growing brighter in glow until it resulted in a huge explosion. The main character quickly activated hardening to shield himself from the explosion, but his screen was still undergoing various stages of error and denial. It was all very aggravating for the young lad. The man cursed as his body once more began to glitch, and the explosion rocketed through the area he was standing. It was looking like the sergeant would not make it. The flames were hot, and the wind spirit was knocked off balance as that heat rose to consume and destroy. Junmo cried out in concern for Sergeant Lee Hyunwook, and even the glasses guy was shocked. An area attack that totaled an A-rank explosion was sure to cause a great level of destruction. They feared their friend would not survive it. This person that was attacking them was very clearly bad news, and even the main character was thinking that. These shameless thieves really came armed with high-powered weapons. However, Hyunwook was protected by the paladin jumping into the fray with her giant holy shield. The man was shocked by the actions of the noble platoon leader, but she yelled back that if the man fell at this point, he would not be able to protect Laputa, much less his squadmates. Laputa was their treasure, and they could not let it fall into enemy hands. The man had to use this opportunity to get into the control room immediately. She would happily be his shield, just like how her sister had been her shield in the past. The man understood her request and leaped away. He did not dare let her sacrifice be in vain and raced off to solve the problem that only he could fix. Of course, the Sheikh's thieves had no intention of losing at this point. The military man angrily punched the redhead's shield, hoping to bring her down one way or another. The lady was shocked by the force of that punch that rocked her shield. She wondered if that was an attack. The soldiers were engulfed with flames surrounding them from the force of the explosion. Suddenly, a voice called out, calling the soldier a fat piece of lard. It was the drunken speedster, and he ran in defense of Seo Yunha. The speedster dashed quickly, cutting through the military man and all of his defense, bringing him down. The man's armor fell apart, and he looked speechless to be defeated by these people. There was yet another large explosion, and the other Americans watched as this fight went down. As the battle raged, the Korean forces encouraged Sergeant Lee Hunwook to keep going in quickly, because they would hold the enemy and make sure that they could not pass. Glasses was shaking from his lack of alcohol as withdrawal was painfully bad for him. His body was not even listening to him anymore. Still, he needed to stand steady because the sergeant was leaving the defense of that place to them. While they fought, Hunwook summoned Talak and got ready to go to the control room immediately. The Americans watched, with one of their fighters down but two more still raring to go. They said that he'd only have to worry about the soldier who controlled metal, so the American general was furious that his informant was not trustworthy at all. There turned out to be a lot of powerful soldiers on the Korean side after all. The Americans then began to power up because no one was as dedicated to stealing as they were. They powered up and their bodies began to glow, using an ability called Absorb Wound. The name was barely imaginative and it did just about what you'd expect it to do, just minus a few health points. The first soldier that fell was ready to fight once more, and the Korean soldiers were horrified to see that happen when the dude had been troublesome to take down in the first place. As if healing their wounds wasn't bad enough, the colonel of the American side was also tossing out buffs like candies to his soldiers. Those guys powered up ×2 and they were looking very deadly with their equipment, ready to cause carnage. The whole thing was very inconvenient, and the colonel ordered his soldiers to charge once more. The paladin yelled for her soldiers to stop them in return. They had no intention of letting these guys just do whatever they wanted. Everyone charged in at the same time, with the fighting and the roaring and the exchanging blows. It was a battle filled with color and flashing lights, a battle of wills, seeing who would be the victor and who would be left standing to claim the trophy of Laputa. The female watched with her gun, fixing a target on where she felt the enemy was too troublesome. Then she raised her gun. The paladin hissed and winced, noticing that they swapped the bullet attribute without even changing rounds. The lady with the gun was dangerous. The paladin yelled for everyone to get behind her shield immediately, and they all raced to obey her command. The soldiers were shocked, each of them running as fast as they could to escape the large metal bullets that came barreling towards them. See, John Mo and the glasses all ran, but who knows if they made it in time before the huge explosion happened, smoke covering everything and everyone. It seems the speedster was fast enough to escape the explosion after all, as expected from the fast ginger. He slid to a stop away from the blast zone and looked up in great horror. Each of those horrible soldiers seemed to be as powerful as a company, and he wondered just who these guys were. The dedication of thieving Americans was not to be underestimated. Suddenly, he realized that the huge attack had become a large block of ice. Inside the ice, all of his comrades were frozen. Hyunwook also seemed to have reappeared in his bubble shield. The sergeant stared in horror, recognizing the recovery and buff battle style. He knew exactly who had come to face them now, and he did not look pleased about it at all. The attribute buff enhancement was activated before his eyes, and the muscular soldier leapt forward, aiming to take down the steel-eating soldier. The blue-haired soldier grit his teeth to see the man approaching, and he braced himself for the attack that was sure to come. The speedster screamed to protect the main character, yelling for the large soldier to focus on him instead. The soldier raised his arms in defense, ready to in fact focus on the man with glasses. He saw that fast-moving sword coming this time since he knew what to expect. This time the man was able to dodge that light-speed attack, much to the ginger's shock and horror. The man continued to attack, trying to bring that soldier down, but it was no use. The man dodged every blow and every swing. He bobbed and he weaved, always staying out of the ginger's reach, and then he braced to hit him. The speedster then realized that the man could not just notice him now. That fast-moving soldier throwing a punch in his direction could suddenly now move just as fast as he did. This was a horrifying realization, but the speedster was able to block that blow, and a resulting explosion followed. The flames already bubbling in the Laputa grew with intensity, and the man with glasses was blown backwards, crashing into the walls. The Sergeant Lee Hyunwook was horrified and called out to Sergeant Choi Youngjun. He had been their last man standing. Now, Lee Hyunwook knew what was going on, and he ordered Youngjun to get the man casting buffs in the back. That was their true hindrance and opponent. If they could get that guy, then they could win. They had to hold off these fighters until the main character could come back. The speedster cursed at him, since his boss was talking like it was some kind of easy thing to do. The important thing to the ginger was not holding them back. Not when they could actually die fighting these three monsters. A bright light filled the space, various cubes lighting up the area as they circled around the light that shone like a star. The cubes were uncountable, and they circled around the spherical key for the island of technology. Lee Hunwook floated around in this lit-up space with the sphere by his side. They had come to the zenith of the Hextech Gnomes, the central control room of Laputa. It was one of the few places in the world that could interfere with the system. The sergeant was amazed, saying that he'd guessed as much. This was a place where they could work against the system. Now was not the time to be amazed though. After all, their obliteration was imminent. So, the sergeant asked the floating orb to analyze what was wrong with him first. His system kept glitching and he just could not fight like that. So, the sphere analyzes the temporary administrator's errors, scanning for the reason his body constantly experienced system failures. A bright light shone over him as the analysis was done, and at the center of his soul sat a being with many wings and one large eye. Underneath that being were two forms, one with hair of dark and another with light hair. The man screamed in agony as the analysis result popped out. The cause of the error was a temporary biological data mismatch. The player currently had an out-of-level growth, incomplete memory, transformed from an unregistered item, along with a fragment from the Demon King's corpse. Lee Hunwook had basically become a mismatch of multiple things, much like a Frankenstein monster. The blue-haired man was surprised to see this data, as if he'd not been there when his body had swallowed all those foreign items. Now that he looked at all the weird things floating inside of him, the constant glitches were starting to make sense. The error analysis was complete, and the summary cause was that there were multiple registered data collisions detected. The man's current cores were timeline, altered Lee Hyunwook, the Azazel's necklace which was a physical artifact, gluttony who was the fragment of the Demon King's corpse, and the player's core data. All four things had combined to form into a huge collapsed mess, and they had created an anomaly. The man had been classified as an error and he was being removed by the system. It was that simple. The man groaned to final that he was an amalgamation of errors. This sort of thing was bound to happen considering how reckless he'd been. Then, he asked Talos how he could possibly solve this problem. Talos then explained that it could be solved by separating all of the entangled data from his core, but it could be deadly to lose his past memories. If he were to untangle as suggested, the three pieces of data connected to his core and the memories and skills of the timeline, altered Lee Hunwook would be deleted. Obviously the absolute glutton for information and power was not down with that. It was to be expected for an F-tanker who'd worked so hard to amass so much, and now he was being asked to give it away or die. If he lost the power of Azazel, that was basically acting as his temporary heart, he would surely die. Even if he got lucky and somehow survived, without the memories from his past life, everything that he'd done so far would be meaningless, and he'd be left stumbling in the dark and losing his friends again. However, the sergeant came up with a brilliant idea. If they could separate the data, then surely they could combine them. It seemed the sphere had never considered such an audacious thing, and it took a moment to figure it out. Theoretically, this idea was rather possible. However, for data fusion, the core data would need to be dissected as well. In that case, the success rate was a rather low percentage, and it was very unlikely. This could result in the hero losing both his core and his data in the process of attempting to save his life. Even if he did succeed, with multiple pieces of data being fused together, he may not end up the same. With all this laid out, Talos then asked the hero if he would like to proceed. The sergeant took a deep breath and admitted that he only had one choice here. So of course, he was definitely going to do it. The sphere understood his master's daredevil tendencies and prepared for the unification to begin. They would then begin the dissection for data fusion. All four materials began to swirl around him as the fusion started. The sphere first said a farewell, with the sergeant's complete obliteration still a possibility. The Bluenet protested that the sphere should be encouraging instead of cynical, but the sphere ignored him and quickly got down to business. The data dissection for fusion started, and the fire section progress already hit 23%. The warning and out that there was a chance that the man would get obliterated in the process. This was about the third warning. At this rate it almost seemed like a prayer. The boy stared at his hand in horror, and the data dissection was in progress. It kept building up to 53%, going faster and faster. The sergeant doubled over, wrapping his arms around himself as he groaned. There was a warning as the data dissection rate was rapidly increasing. The temporary administrator code data sustainment probability had also decreased to near zero. Data dissection had halted. The player was in agony, screaming that the process must not stop, no matter what. His whole form was disintegrating, and so was basically everything else that he was trying to combine with. It almost seemed like he just might get obliterated after all. There was a beat of darkness occupied by the protagonist's screams. Suddenly, the light flashed on once again, and the focus was taken back to the speedy Sergeant Youngjun. The man still fought with the giant pillar of ice standing before him. The American fighter had paused in confusion because it seemed to him that his opponent was acting strange. Even the fighter shooting out a barrage of bullets had also paused. The air was tense. The commander of the enemy forces admired Youngjun for not surrendering. However, they did not want an unnecessary sacrifice, so they told him to give up while he still had the chance. The soldier shook where he stood. His body had endured a lot just to keep these guys at bay. Then he whipped forward, a shit-eating grin on his face as he laughed and asked exactly what they were talking about. He did not understand their translator at all. The ginger stared ahead at the icy wall in front of him and considered his options. He wondered if his odds would increase if he saved the squad members first. However, the enemy would not give him time to casually get reinforcements. The soldier growled that he should not have gotten back up, and he prepared to beat up the ginger again, saying that he didn't like hitting people who were already unsteady on their feet. Tough luck, because the ginger laughed that he'd already done so much that he might as well keep acting like a villain. They had legit broken into the country just to steal something that did not belong to them, so Youngjun also intended on playing dirty without feeling guilty. The fight restarted and the bigger man flung his fist. The speedy ginger retaliated by sticking his sword between his legs and slicing up, much to the horror of the bigger soldier. The man managed to dodge that very dangerous slice, and they both twirled and dodged as they fought. The bigger soldier was irritated as he dodged the man's fast jabs, and the ginger raced ahead, leaving the muscular dude behind. He'd managed to trip him up and make him fall, so the speedster was not going to miss this chance. He zoomed forward into the ice and created a whirlwind as he spun with his blade, heading straight for the fighter with the powerful gun. Of course, that mighty weapon was raised with the intention to do maximum damage. Multiple bullets sped at him with high speeds, and there were so many of them that he had to be careful about dodging them. They exploded at once, nearly throwing him off his path, but the speedy ginger managed to dodge that barrage of bullets. Laughing manically, Youngjun grinned by saying they would only win the game by destroying the Nexus. Then, he approached the commander, who was shocked to see the speedy soldier get so close. Naturally, the commander did not fancy such a mistake, but it was too late to dodge as the speedster put his all into slicing and dicing the lead man as much as he could. With a joyous grin, the ginger landed and the commander seemed to be falling apart behind him. However, the man's face suddenly hardened into a frown and the scary old man activated an ability called the armor reversal. This ability could reflect a portion of the physical damage received back to the attacker. To his shock, Youngjun's glasses split in two. His attack had been reserved and he felt all the cuts that he'd slammed on that wicked commander fall back on him. The ginger took maximum damage, losing his footing and falling. The commander looked down on the fallen soldier with an emotionless expression on his face. The man thought it was a shame. After all, the speedster would have made a great ranger under his command. So not only had they come to steal the artifact, they also didn't mind stealing a couple of citizens too. All the soldiers had fallen at this rate with the paladin, the flying sergeant and Junmo frozen in ice, and Youngjun fallen to his own attack. The commander then yelled out an order for his commanders to follow. They were to capture the master administrator within the control room. His dedicated soldiers yelled out their affirmative intention to follow that order. Deep inside the administrator, a bright light was lit aglow. Talos bubbled with energy as he worked to fix what was wrong with Hyanwook. The code fusion progress was halfway completed and the key skill data was under fusion. Suddenly the fusion was moving real slow and the protagonist was still engulfed with light, his head lowered as the data fusion progress hit its final stages. The stabilization protocol had been activated and the target existence was being realized. The sergeant player began to glow as the fusion continued and finally the fusion hit the 100% of completion. All functional data had been fused, and the sergeant opened his eyes. It seemed gluttony had given him a much-needed makeover. The enemy soldiers were given their next order by their high commander, and the wicked man with the ugly heart ordered that they capture the master administrator within the control room. The commanders immediately approved of this. The battle in the sky continued to wage, but as that happened, someone down below watched the whole thing unfold in a pristine white suit. The Korean guilds would not have any available resources to respond to anything else in Seoul because of the internal terrorist attacks. This man was Ki Bakjun, the 10th ranked player in South Korea, the guild master of the Great Mountain Guild, and the master of the guild that was ranked number 3 in Korea. The man was annoyed at the global chaos, wondering if it was necessary and wondering how they would respond if an actual war broke out. The person at the other end of the call laughed, asking why a response was necessary. There was more for them to gain with everyone in the world at each other's throats. Besides, their plans would be in trouble in the off chance that Korea gained control of Laputa. The ginger at the other end of the line laughed, saying that the man must be getting old and he was worrying too much. They deployed American assets where elite troops trained to assassinate S ranks. So it seemed the Korean government had a little backstabber in their midst, and the wicked man with the slit iris went on to say that the Fist King was unable to act, so there was little left to stop them in Sil. Little did they know that our fancy-dancy protagonist had just undergone a fancy-dancy new upgrade. The newly formed man emerged from the system like a butterfly breaking away from its cocoon. His wild hair had grown longer like a wolf's mane, and he almost seemed calm in the few seconds after his rebirth. It was hoping for too much that he'd get light hair like gluttony, but our guy would work with what he got. At any rate, his eyes flashed open with the blinding beauty of heterochromia, one blue and one of gold. He looked upon the carnage before him with a new light, taking note of the giant ice tower in the middle of the battlefield. Talos emerged with him, releasing a warning as damage was detected within the Laputa. Those foreigners were already busy on their way to steal, kill, and destroy. The cause of the damage was determined to have been done by an unidentified number of intruders. Their soldiers were still frozen in ice, and the sergeant looked round to find Youngjun in a pool of his own blood. He also looked to the side and located a few more of the intruders busy doing intruder things. The ice towers were also rather dangerous and pointy. Registering all these things, the sergeant then informed his buddy Talos to assess their casualties first. This command was confirmed. 3 frozen squad members were identified, and they were not in danger of any life-threatening injuries. One squad member was also found on the ground with deep cuts and his condition was considered rather critical. However, he had also been given first aid by an unknown party. That was indeed surprising. Still, Hyunwook advised the key not to get too close. Just as he said that, something hot emerged from the ice. It almost looked like a mechanical hand shooting hot flames from its midsection. It was not the only of its kind either, as multiple little hands popped out as well, and they flexed out, showing off their midsection where large and long dangerous-looking chains shot out of. All those dangerous-looking chains came flying towards the sergeant. These were the special American military special equipment. They were the M7 smart mines. Their functions included emitting magic shackles instead of an explosion and automatically capturing targets within a 10-mile radius. On resistance, shackles could immediately become tighter and stronger. These shackles could also restrain the player's man recovery and make their abilities unusable. These wicked chains could even restrain an S-ranker, and these were the chains that wrapped around and detained the Sergeant Lee Hyunwook. The commander remained calm as the enemy soldiers yelled and told him to surrender immediately. His squad members had been neutralized, and these intruders decided by themselves that Korea did not have the power necessary to control Laputa. So they wanted the sergeant to hand over the controls. The enemy commander even said that if they surrendered now, their squad in Korea would not need to suffer anymore. Spoken like a selfish jerk. They came to someone else's home and they wanted to take everything they wanted because they assumed that Korea was weaker than them. Hyunwook asked if this was how Colonel Garrett Whittle of the Anti-Rank S Division conducted his duties. There was silence between the two for a hot minute as the colonel considered these words. The man seemed angered that the protagonist would dare to speak of the classified secret that was the Anti-Rank S Division. He did not know who the sergeant was, but since the man knew about them, then he would not let the hero escape so easily. Not only had they come to steal, they also seemed angered enough to torture a stranger for daring to know the military secret of his enemy. They even planned on taking him with them, so they were going to steal him too. There was no end to their thievery. His officers were down with that too, and they rushed ahead to capture Lee Hyunwook with force. However, the newly fused sergeant was unbothered by the attack of weaklings and his eyes glowed as he activated an extreme metal smash. The chains that held him down broke apart underneath him, and the colonel realized that they'd made a terrible mistake. The man called for his soldier to fall back, but it was too late for the thieves as the chains snapped around the blue-haired sergeant. Then, the man activated his metal control. Still, the enemy soldier somehow felt convinced that he could stop Hyunwook on his own. A rookie mistake. The chains broke apart and a huge explosion rocketed through the area as they both attacked at once. Fire and debris flew through the air and the colonel could only watch with apprehension. The flaming fist had connected with the sergeant's face, but the sergeant had already activated hardening. He mocked the thief for not listening to his commander. He then placed his hand on the big man's armor and activated metal bending and metal control. The soldier was thrown back, hitting the ground with the speed and force of a falling star. His armor shattered around his body, and the man spat blood when he made contact with the ground. Then, Hyunwook whipped round to face the next foe. He fired toward, aiming for the commander where he stood as this fight was personal. The colonel yelled that they might have to damage Laputa a bit in this battle. but he commanded his forces to take down the fighter at all costs. The sergeant then activated his own super fancy dancy ability of the attribute buff maximum enhancement. This ability would increase mana, and he targeted this buff towards his other Sergeant Camilla Serrano, who was still an active player in this dangerous game. It would also enhance her speed and increase the power of her projectiles. Empowered by the colonel, the sergeant prepared to fire, zeroing in on our guy, and was ready to do what it took to take him down. A barrage of bullets was unleashed right at him, not caring the damage that any of those bullets could do to Laputa now. As those bullets raced towards him, Hyun-wook stretched out his hand. It was a pitiful thing when all weapons were made of metal or steel and they were attacking a metal and steel bending genius. Those many and many bullets were halted in their path, dancing around the sergeant like stars would around the pale blue moon. A huge explosion sounded around the sergeant, but he was untouched and unaffected by the carnage that happened around him. Instead, he sped forward without hesitation, and the enemy sergeant became a little intimidated, wondering who this guy was and why they were having such a hard time fighting him. The man was deflecting all of her mana rounds while she was buffed to the max. The blue-haired hero told the other officer to stay out of this, and he stretched out some fingers in her direction. He could not trust a soldier not to fire their weapon after all, so he had to get rid of the weapon and activated metal decomposing. All of her armor flew away, melting into nothing and leaving her in her camo. The erosion also stole from her the weapon she'd used to ruin so many lives. That was 2 enemy soldiers taken down, and the sergeant raced ahead to take down their head boss and the man in charge. The female sergeant fell, so in shock that her weave came undone. The hero sharpened his finger into a dagger as he approached the main man in charge, determined to do harm. The colonel grit his teeth but prepared to face this powerful devil. As the hero approached, the man activated his own abilities, and of course it was armor reversal, a very dangerous ability that could reflect a fixed ratio of direct physical and magical damage back to the attacker. Currently the reflection rate was 120% based on the caster's defense and focus. It was activated as soon as the user was hit and it would consume about 10% of HP. However, this ability could not be used consecutively and required a 60-second cooldown period. This was an advantage that they could exploit. Plus, if the reflection damage was too high, the user's muscle tissue and nervous system could suffer backlash. If HSS over 3 times, the user would temporarily be unable to battle. The hero slashed the commander's face, tearing it open with his dagger in a brutal display of efficiency and power. That was a dangerous move because it meant possibly blinding himself with that reverse damage skill on. However, that is just how it appeared. The colonel's eyes widened in horror, realizing that his opponent had unleashed a fake attack and only scratched him lightly on the cheek. The sergeant then calmly explained to the man that he'd known that his enemy would use that ability. The blue-haired hero was also aware of its 60-second cooldown period where he couldn't reuse his invincibility skill. Lee Hyun-wook already knew what to do when fighting this man, so he paused and told the old man to give up while he still had the chance because there was something that he needed that man to do in the future, and he did not want to kill him either. The man was already aware that their intelligence on Korea and Laputa was faulty. The colonel was disgusted and asked if the sergeant thought he was cheap enough to be bought. Obviously this thief was a patriotic citizen, and he wasn't going to give up on his mission that easily, not when he was such a dedicated soldier. The sergeant informed him that most high-ranking players around the world had already gone missing. There were more and more controversies around the powerful countries as each day passed. Even the Laputa further proved his point. All of these countries came at the same day to attack at the same time. How likely was such an event? There was indeed more than met the eye concerning this unique situation. The fallen big sergeant seemed to have recovered and he was not standing up. However, Hyun-wook kept talking to the other man, mentioning that he was indeed truly odd for all of them to attack on the same day. It was almost like some unseen force was actively trying to put them against each other. The colonel growled and added that the other countries would not stop attacking just because they backed off. They needed to secure the Laputa for the safety of the world, and he called out his men to fight. So this stubborn old thief was not going to back down. Well, since that was the case, Hyun-wook called out for Talos to open the armory. The master armory opened at the man's command and Laputa's gates began to roll and twist, opening up an internal platform for defense. The enemy was shocked when the defense rolled out, all of them a bit more hesitant when they saw 4 blue translucent wings rise from the side of the Laputa. All of these wings were littered with weapons. There were multiple pieces of armor within them. It was such a large amount that it was granted that anyone who saw it would go speechless with awe. There were guns and knives and swords, more weapons than the world could produce in such a difficult time. Lee Hyun-wook took the opportunity to remind the colonel that he'd told him to stop. He'd given the possibility of a peaceful resolution. Now the enemy commander gaped at him in disbelief, almost unable to believe that Korea could in fact handle their property very well actually. Ki Baekshun had already suspected that this was how things would turn out, and he warned his contact person that there was an unusual jerk inside the Laputa, a soldier that defied all reasoning. He was also likely the one getting in the way of the enemy all this time. The guildmaster worried that their opposition was an S rank that the military had been developing in secret. Based on the things that the sergeant had achieved so far, they had to consider the failure of their special team as well. This was new to the people around the ginger, who hummed as they considered an S rank that had not been listed. Well, the ginger did not like that idea at all, and he asked them to put that guy at the top of their assassination list and have it done. Still, the wicked man was doubtful. He didn't think his special anti-S rank team could possibly fail. However, the colonel stared in horror at the man's perfect control over the Laputa, and a new fear entered his heart. He was almost sure that they were fighting an S-ranked enemy. However, this inhuman overwhelming power was not at all the norm, even for an S rank. That was particularly because our guy had also consumed the power of gluttony, so he was just out here flexing his demonic aura. In all of the colonel's countless encounters, he had honed his instincts, and right now his instincts were telling him something.